They laughed at the janitor's car. They had no idea it was worth $2 billion. On a cold November morning, Lucas Reed pulled into the executive parking lot in a rusted 1967 Mustang that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. When the CEO and her investors stepped out of their luxury vehicles, the mockery was instant and loud. They called it junk. They called him invisible. What they didn't know was that beneath that peeling paint and dented hood lived an engine that would shatter everything they thought they understood about power, innovation, and the cost of underestimating a quiet man who had already lost too much to care about their opinions. If you're ready to see how a father's love became an engineering revolution, stay with me until the end, and when you're done, hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Lucas's story travels. The fog came in thick that morning, rolling off the bay in dense gray sheets that turned the world into something uncertain and half-formed. Lucas Reed drove through it slowly, his 1967 Mustang rumbling with a sound that didn't quite match what anyone would expect from a car that looked like it had been salvaged from a junkyard and barely survived the process. The vehicle's exterior told a story of neglect. Rust bloomed along the wheel wells like some kind of automotive disease. The paint had faded and peeled until the original color was anyone's guess, and one headlight sat slightly crooked, giving the car a lopsided, almost apologetic appearance. But Lucas wasn't apologetic. Not about the car, anyway. He pulled into the parking lot of Meridian Technologies just before 6 in the morning, the way he had every weekday for the past 3 years. The lot was still mostly empty at this hour, which was exactly how Lucas preferred it. Fewer people meant fewer questions. Fewer sideways glances, fewer moments where he had to feel the weight of other people's assumptions about who he was and what his life had become. He parked in his usual spot, far corner, away from the executive spaces near the entrance, and cut the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own breathing, steady and even. Through the windshield, the Meridian building rose up through the fog like something from another world, all glass and steel in sharp angles that seemed designed to intimidate. Lucas had spent 3 years mopping those floors, emptying those trash cans, wiping down those pristine surfaces that important people touched without ever really seeing. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Lucas picked it up and saw the reminder he'd set for himself the night before. Evans Science Fair, 3 p.m. Don't forget. The message came with a photo his son had attached weeks ago when they'd first started working on the project together. Evan, 12 years old and still wearing that gap-toothed smile that made Lucas's chest hurt, with something that felt like love and fear mixed together in equal measure. The boy stood next to his model of a hybrid propulsion system, the kind of thing most kids his age wouldn't even understand, let alone attempt to build. But Evan wasn't most kids. He had his father's mind, that same relentless curiosity that had once driven Lucas to fill notebooks with equations and sketches that mapped out futures he'd never get to see. Lucas saved the photo and pocketed the phone. He checked his watch, 6:15. His shift didn't officially start until 7, but he always came early. It gave him time to think, to prepare himself for the particular kind of invisibility his job required. Being a janitor meant being part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electrical systems. Necessary, but unnoticed. Present, but unseen. He grabbed his lunch bag from the passenger seat, a sandwich Evan had made for him the night before. The bread cut slightly uneven, too much mustard, made with the kind of earnest care that 12-year-old boys bring to tasks they think will make their fathers proud. Lucas had watched him make it, had seen the concentration on Evan's face as he'd carefully wrapped it in aluminum foil, and hadn't said a word about the mustard. The morning air hit him when he opened the door, cold and damp, and carrying the salt smell of the ocean that was somewhere beyond the fog. Lucas pulled his jacket tighter. A canvas work coat that had seen better years, patched at the elbows, collar frayed, and started toward the employee entrance at the back of the building. He'd taken maybe 10 steps when he heard the sound of engines, multiple engines, expensive engines that purred instead of rumbled. Lucas stopped and turned. Through the fog, headlights appeared like searching eyes. A convoy of vehicles emerged into the parking lot, a black Mercedes S-Class leading the way, followed by 2 Range Rovers and a Tesla that moved with the silent menace of something designed to make other cars feel inadequate. They swept past Lucas's Mustang, and he watched as all 4 vehicles slowed simultaneously, as if pulled by the same invisible string. The Mercedes stopped first, right beside his car. The driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out, and Lucas recognized her immediately, even through the fog. Victoria Chen, CEO of Meridian Technologies, 46 years old and dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lucas made in 3 months. She was looking at his Mustang with an expression Lucas had seen before, many times, that particular combination of amusement and disdain that successful people reserved for things they considered beneath them. The Range Rovers disgorged their passengers next. 4 men in expensive suits, investors probably, the kind of people who move through the world with the confidence of those who'd never had to choose between paying rent and fixing a broken water heater. They gathered around Victoria, and Lucas could see their mouths moving, could imagine the conversation even if he couldn't hear it yet. Then Victoria's voice carried across the parking lot, sharp and clear, despite the muffling effect of the fog. "Good God, whose car is that? It looks like it should be in a salvage yard." The investors laughed. The sound cut through the morning silence like breaking glass. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't move. He'd learned a long time ago that the best response to mockery was no response at all. Invisibility had its advantages. He shifted his lunch bag to his other hand and started to turn away, to disappear like he was supposed to. "I'm serious," Victoria continued, walking closer to the Mustang now, the investors trailing behind her like pilot fish following a shark. "This is executive parking. Someone needs to tell maintenance to have this thing towed. It's an eyesore. We have potential partners visiting today, and I will not have them thinking we're the kind of company that tolerates this level of—" She stopped mid-sentence. Lucas had turned back around, and she'd finally noticed him standing there, 30 feet away, holding his lunch bag and wearing his janitor's jacket with his name stitched over the pocket. For a moment, Victoria's face went blank. Then understanding arrived, and with it something that might have been embarrassment if she'd been the type of person who embarrassed easily, which she wasn't. "Oh," she said. "Lucas, this is your vehicle?" Lucas nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak yet. The tightness in his chest had spread to his throat. One of the investors, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a tan that spoke of golf courses and beach houses, let out a low whistle. "You actually drive this thing? How does it even run?" "Barely, I'd imagine," another investor chimed in, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "What is it, a 67? 68? Must be held together with duct tape and prayer." More laughter. Victoria didn't laugh, but she didn't stop them either. She just stood there, looking at Lucas with an expression that managed to be both apologetic and condescending at the same time, as if she was sorry he had to hear this, but also understood why it needed to be said. "Lucas," she said, her voice taking on that particular tone people used when they were about to deliver criticism disguised as concern. "I'm going to be direct with you. This vehicle is not appropriate for executive parking. I know you come in early, and I appreciate your work ethic, but we need to maintain a certain standard of presentation here. There are staff lots in the back where this would be more suitable." Lucas finally found his voice. It came out quieter than he'd intended, but steady. "This isn't executive parking. It's the far corner. I park here every day." "Yes, but it's visible from the entrance," Victoria countered. "And as I said, we have important meetings today. Presentation matters in this industry." The silver-haired investor stepped closer to the Mustang, peering through the driver's side window. "Jesus, the interior's even worse. Seats are torn to hell. Dashboard's cracked. Does this thing even have air conditioning?" "Probably runs on sheer stubbornness," the younger investor added, and they all laughed again except Victoria, who was still watching Lucas with that same mixed expression. Lucas felt his phone buzz in his pocket. Another reminder, probably. Evan's science fair. 3 p.m. The boy would be waiting for him, would want to show off everything they'd worked on together, would look for his father in the crowd with that smile that made every sacrifice worth it. "I'll move it," Lucas said quietly. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He started toward the Mustang, but Victoria held up a hand. "Wait, before you go, I actually wanted to speak with you about something else. We're having a company event next month, a tech showcase for investors. We'll need extra coverage from the custodial staff. I know it's outside your normal hours, but there would be overtime pay. Are you interested?" Lucas stopped. He looked at Victoria, then at the investors who were still smirking at his car, then back at Victoria. "I'll need to check my son's schedule first," he said. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "Your son's schedule? Lucas, this is a significant opportunity. We're talking about time and a half, potentially more if we need weekend coverage. Surely your son can manage one evening without you." Something hot flickered in Lucas's chest, but he kept his voice level. "I'm a single parent, Ms. Chen. My son comes first. I'll let you know after I've checked with him." For just a moment, something shifted in Victoria's expression, a flash of what might have been respect or surprise, or possibly just recalculation as she reassessed the man standing in front of her. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual professional mask. "Of course," she said smoothly. "Family is important. Let me know by end of week." She turned back to her investors, already moving on to the next topic, the next item on her agenda. Lucas was dismissed, invisible again. He walked to his car while they headed toward the building entrance, their voices fading into the fog. When he opened the Mustang's door, the hinges creaked with a sound that seemed louder than it should have been. He sat in the driver's seat, torn upholstery that he'd repaired with duct tape more than once, just like the investors had guessed, and put his hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking slightly. Lucas closed his eyes and took a slow breath. He thought about Evan, about the science fair project, about the hours they'd spent together in their tiny garage, working on a model that barely scratched the surface of what Lucas really understood about propulsion systems and energy efficiency. He thought about the notebooks hidden in his apartment, filled with designs and calculations that represented years of late-night work after Evan had gone to bed. He thought about choices made and paths not taken, and the particular weight of being a man whose greatest creation sat in a middle school gymnasium, waiting to be judged by teachers who wouldn't understand half of what they were looking at. Then he thought about the engine beneath the hood of this ridiculous car, this eyesore, this piece of junk that Victoria Chen and her investors had just spent 5 minutes mocking without having the slightest idea what they were actually looking at. Lucas opened his eyes. The shaking in his hands had stopped. He turned the key in the ignition, and the Mustang came to life with a sound that was nothing like what anyone would expect from a car this old, this battered, this apparently pathetic. The engine didn't roar or rumble or cough. It hummed, a deep, precise, almost musical note that spoke of perfect tolerances and flawless engineering. The whole car seemed to settle into itself, balanced and powerful and completely controlled. Lucas put his hand on the gear shift and felt the subtle vibration of machinery operating at peak efficiency. No one ever listened closely enough to hear it. No one ever looked closely enough to see past the rust and the torn seats. They saw what they expected to see, and what they expected was exactly what Lucas needed them to expect. He backed out of the parking space slowly, carefully, the way he did everything. Through the windshield, he could see Victoria and her investors disappearing into the building, already forgetting about the janitor and his embarrassing car. They had important work to do, important decisions to make, important futures to shape. And so did Lucas. He drove to the back lot where the staff parked their vehicles, 10-year-old Hondas and 20-year-old pickup trucks, and one ancient Volkswagen Beetle that belonged to Carmen from accounting. He found a space far from the building and cut the engine. In the sudden silence, he could hear the morning starting to wake up around him, birds calling through the fog, the distant sound of traffic from the highway, the hydraulic hiss of a delivery truck somewhere nearby. Lucas grabbed his lunch bag and got out. He locked the car, unnecessary probably, since no one would steal something this ugly, and started the long walk to the employee entrance. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it out and saw a text from Evan, sent 20 minutes ago while Lucas had been watching Victoria Chen and her investors laugh at his life. "Can't wait for you to see the project today, Dad. Think we'll win?" Lucas typed back with cold fingers, "Win or lose, I'm proud of you. See you at 3. The response came immediately. "Love you, Dad." Lucas stared at the words for a long moment. Then he pocketed the phone and walked into Meridian Technologies through the back entrance where the invisible people came and went, where the janitors and the maintenance staff and the security guards moved through their days unnoticed and unappreciated, doing the work that kept everything running while people like Victoria Chen took credit for the success. The break room was empty when Lucas arrived. He stored his lunch in the ancient refrigerator that wheezed and rattled, but somehow kept running, then grabbed his supply cart from the storage closet. Mop, bucket, cleaning solutions that smelled like fake pine and actual chemicals. He checked his list for the day. Executive offices on the third floor, conference rooms on the second. The lobby that would need extra attention before Victoria's investor meetings began. Lucas started pushing his cart toward the elevator, and as he did, he passed a wall of photographs celebrating Meridian's achievements. Company milestones, product launches, award ceremonies. There was Victoria shaking hands with the mayor, Victoria cutting a ribbon at a new facility, Victoria accepting an innovation award for a hybrid propulsion system that had made the company billions. Lucas stopped in front of that last photograph. He'd seen it 1,000 times, but today it looked different somehow. Sharper, more real. He stared at Victoria's smile, at the trophy in her hands, at the banner behind her that read, "Revolutionary Engine Design Transforms Industry." His phone buzzed. Not Evan this time, just a calendar reminder. Weekly maintenance check. Mustang engine. 8 p.m. tonight. Lucas silenced the notification and kept walking. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Lucas pulled his cart inside and pressed the button for the third floor. As the doors slid closed, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished metal. A tired-looking man in his mid-40s, graying at the temples, wearing a janitor's uniform that had been washed so many times the fabric had gone soft and thin. A man who looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. A man who carried no threat, posed no challenge, deserved no second glance. The elevator rose smoothly, efficiently, carrying Lucas up to the executive level where he would spend the next 8 hours making sure everything looked perfect for people who would never know his last name or ask about his weekend or wonder what he did when he went home at night to a son who believed his father could do anything. When the doors opened, Lucas stepped out into the third-floor corridor. The executive offices stretched out before him, all glass walls and expensive art and views of the city that most people would never get to see from this height. Somewhere in this building, Victoria Chen was probably in her office preparing for her important meetings, planning her important presentations, making her important decisions about the future of Meridian Technologies. And somewhere in this same building, Lucas Reed was about to mop her floor. He pulled his cart down the hallway, past offices that were just starting to fill with people who arrived at reasonable hours because their work was valued, because their contributions mattered, because someone had decided a long time ago that what they did was worth respecting. Lucas started with Victoria's office first. He always did. The door was unlocked. She hadn't arrived yet. So he let himself in and began the familiar routine. Empty the trash. Wipe down the desk. Polish the glass walls, vacuum the carpet, make everything perfect for someone who would never notice unless it wasn't. While he worked, Lucas's eyes drifted to the documents on Victoria's desk. He didn't mean to look. He'd trained himself not to see things that weren't his business. But one folder caught his attention. It was labeled Project Evergreen, Hybrid Propulsion Update. Lucas's hand stilled on the cleaning cloth. He knew he shouldn't. He knew every rule about privacy and professionalism and keeping his head down, but his hand was already reaching for the folder, already opening it, already scanning the first page of what turned out to be a technical breakdown of Meridian's flagship engine design. The design that had made Victoria Chen famous, the design that had earned Meridian billions, the design that Lucas recognized immediately because he'd drawn every line of it himself 13 years ago, in a cluttered apartment while Evan slept in the next room and the world outside moved on without them. His breathing had gone shallow. Lucas forced himself to close the folder, to put it back exactly where it had been, to finish cleaning Victoria's office like nothing had happened. But his mind was racing now, pulling up memories he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself they weren't real. The presentation he'd made to Meridian's board when he was still an engineer still had a future. Still believed that good ideas mattered more than good timing. The rejection letter that came 3 weeks later, full of corporate language that boiled down to too risky, too innovative, too different from what we're currently doing. The quiet devastation of watching his breakthrough become someone else's footnote. And then Evan's mother leaving. The custody battle. The choice between fighting for a career that had already rejected him or fighting for his son who needed him. Lucas had chosen Evan. He'd always choose Evan, but the cost of that choice was working here, in this building, cleaning the office of a woman who'd stolen his life's work and built an empire on it while he pushed a mop. Lucas finished Victoria's office and moved to the next one. His hands worked automatically. Spray, wipe, polish, move on. While his mind stayed stuck in that folder, in that design, in the particular species of injustice that came from being invisible to people who never bothered to look. The morning passed. The executive offices filled with people who nodded at Lucas without seeing him. He cleaned their spaces, made them comfortable, ensured their environment reflected their importance. And with every office, every desk, every polished surface, Lucas felt something building in his chest that he'd kept carefully controlled for 3 years. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too loud, too likely to make him do something stupid that would cost him this job, and the health insurance it provided, and the steady paycheck that kept Evan fed and housed and safe. This was colder, quieter, more patient. At noon, Lucas took his lunch break in the employee break room. He sat at a table by himself. Most of the custodial staff ate in shifts, so he was alone, and unwrapped the sandwich Evan had made. Too much mustard, just like he'd known there would be. Lucas ate it anyway, every bite, tasting his son's love more than the bread or the turkey or the mustard. His phone buzzed. A text from Evan's school. Reminder, science fair begins at 2 p.m. Students should arrive by 1:30 for setup. Lucas checked his watch, 12:15. His shift ended at 2:30, but he could probably leave early. He'd just need to clear it with his supervisor, and she was usually reasonable about things like this. He typed out a quick text to her, asking if he could clock out at 1 to make his son's science fair. The response came back in less than a minute. Should be fine. Finish the 3rd floor, and you're good to go. Lucas allowed himself a small moment of relief. He would make it. He would see Evan's presentation. He would be there in the crowd when his son looked for him, would see the pride on that 12-year-old face, would do the one thing that mattered more than anything else. Show up for his child. He finished his sandwich and threw away the wrapper. As he stood to head back to work, his phone rang. Unknown number. Lucas almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? Is this Lucas Reed? A man's voice, professional, unfamiliar. Yes. Who's this? My name is David Chang. I'm a patent attorney with Morrison & Associates. I'm calling because one of my clients believes there may be prior art related to a hybrid propulsion patent currently held by Meridian Technologies. Your name came up in some old technical forums as someone who worked on similar designs. I was hoping we could talk. Lucas's hand tightened on the phone. The break room suddenly felt smaller, closer, as if the walls were moving in. I don't know what you're talking about, Lucas said carefully. Mr. Reed, I've reviewed the patent in question and compared it to some design concepts that were posted under your name in 2012. The similarities are significant enough that my client believes there may be grounds for a challenge. I'm not looking to cause you any trouble. I just need to verify some dates and establish a timeline. It would only take a few minutes of your time. Lucas closed his eyes. After 13 years of silence, after 3 years of mopping floors in the building where his design had made other people rich, after countless nights of telling himself that none of it mattered as long as Evan was okay, now this. Now a lawyer calling to dig up the past and ask questions that Lucas couldn't answer without risking everything he'd carefully built. I can't help you, Lucas said quietly. I'm sorry. Mr. Reed, if what I suspect is true, you could be entitled to... I said I can't help you. Please don't call this number again. Lucas ended the call before the lawyer could respond. His hand was shaking again, just like it had in the parking lot this morning. He stared at his phone, half expecting it to ring again, but it stayed silent. After a moment, Lucas deleted the call from his history and put the phone back in his pocket. He couldn't afford lawyers, couldn't afford legal battles or patent disputes or anything that might jeopardize his job or bring attention to himself or Evan. The past needed to stay buried, no matter what it cost him. He went back to work. The 3rd floor took another hour to finish. Lucas moved through the offices methodically, his mind split between the task at hand and the lawyer's call, and Evan's science fair, and the folder on Victoria's desk that contained 13 years of theft disguised as innovation. By the time he finished, it was 1 o'clock exactly. Lucas returned his cart to the storage closet, clocked out with his supervisor, and headed to the parking lot. The fog had burned off while he worked, and the afternoon sun cut through the remaining haze in sharp, clear lines. He He walked to the back lot where his Mustang sat waiting, still ugly, still rusty, still looking like exactly what Victoria Chen's investors thought it was. He got in and started the engine. That same precise hum, that same perfect note. Lucas sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, listening to the sound of his own creation running flawlessly despite the mockery it received, despite being called junk, despite no one understanding what it really was. Then he put the car in gear and drove toward Evan's school, leaving Meridian Technologies behind him in the rear-view mirror, at least for a few hours. The science fair was exactly what he expected. A gymnasium full of folding tables, poster boards, and 12-year-olds nervously rehearsing their presentations while parents circulated with cameras and encouraging smiles. Lucas found Evan's table near the back, and when his son saw him coming, the boy's whole face lit up with a joy so pure it made Lucas's chest hurt. "Dad, you made it!" Lucas pulled Evan into a hug. "Of course I made it. Wouldn't miss it for anything." They spent the next 2 hours together, and for those 2 hours, Lucas forgot about Victoria Chen and stolen patents and mockery in parking lots. He listened to Evan explain their hybrid propulsion model, watched his son's hands move with the same gestures Lucas used when he was deep in a design problem, heard the passion in that young voice when Evan talked about energy efficiency and sustainable transportation. The judges came by eventually. They asked questions that Evan answered with confidence that came from actually understanding the material rather than just memorizing it. And when they moved on to the next table, Evan turned to Lucas with hope shining in his eyes. "Think we have a chance, Dad?" Lucas looked at the model they'd built together, at the careful craftsmanship and innovative thinking that had gone into something most people would dismiss as just another middle school project. He thought about his own designs, his own innovations, his own contributions to a world that had never given him credit. "I think," Lucas said slowly, "that win or lose, you did something extraordinary. You built something that matters, and that's worth more than any trophy." Evan's smile widened. "Thanks, Dad. And hey, when the judges asked where I got the idea, I told them you taught me. I said my dad's the smartest person I know." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest, some carefully maintained wall that kept him moving forward without looking back. He pulled his son close and held on tight. This boy who believed in him, who trusted him, who had no idea that the janitor's salary keeping their family afloat came from cleaning the offices of people who'd gotten rich off his father's genius. "Love you, kiddo," Lucas whispered. "Love you too, Dad." They stayed until the fair ended. Evan's project didn't win. The judges gave first place to a girl who designed a water filtration system. But Evan didn't seem too disappointed. He was already talking about next year's project, already spinning ideas about solar panels and battery storage and efficiency improvements. On the drive home, with Evan chattering excitedly in the passenger seat about everything he'd learned and everyone he'd talked to, Lucas felt his phone buzz. He waited until they got home to check it, waited until Evan was in his room doing homework before he looked at the screen. Another text from the unknown number. The lawyer. "Mr. Reed, I understand your hesitation, but you should know that my client is moving forward with the patent challenge regardless. If you're the original designer, your silence won't protect you. It will just ensure you get nothing while Meridian continues to profit from your work. Please reconsider. This could change your life." Lucas stared at the message for a long time. Through the thin walls of their apartment, he could hear Evan humming while he worked, that unconscious sound of a child who felt safe and loved and certain of his place in the world. Lucas deleted the message and blocked the number. Then he went to his bedroom, pulled out the notebooks he kept hidden in the back of his closet, and opened them to the pages he'd drawn 13 years ago. The hybrid propulsion system that would eventually make Meridian Technologies billions. The design that Victoria Chen claimed as her company's innovation. The engine that was worth everything except, apparently, giving credit to the man who'd actually created it. Lucas ran his fingers over the sketches, the equations, the careful notes he'd made when he'd still believed that being brilliant was enough. Then he closed the notebook and put it back in the closet. Tomorrow he would go back to Meridian. He would park his ugly car in the back lot where it wouldn't offend anyone. He would push his cart through hallways where important people made important decisions. He would clean Victoria Chen's office and empty her trash and make sure everything looked perfect for the woman who'd stolen his future. And he would do it all over again the day after that, and the day after that, because that was what being Evan's father required. The engine under the hood of his Mustang could wait. Justice could wait. Recognition could wait. His son needed dinner, and that mattered more than anything else in the world. Lucas closed the closet door and went to the kitchen to cook. The pasta water was boiling when Lucas heard Evan's footsteps padding down the hallway. His son appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his school clothes, backpack sliding off one shoulder, that post-homework exhaustion evident in the way he slumped against the doorframe. "Smells good," Evan said. "Mac and cheese?" "With the breadcrumb topping you like," Lucas confirmed, stirring the pot. "How's the math homework coming?" Evan made a face. "It's fractions. I don't get why we need a common denominator when we could just use decimals for everything." Lucas smiled despite the weight that had settled on his shoulders since that morning. "Because sometimes the exact answer matters more than the convenient one. You can't express 1/3 perfectly as a decimal, but you can as a fraction." "That's what Mr. Patterson said too," Evan admitted, moving to the refrigerator to pour himself a glass of milk. "Doesn't make it less annoying, though." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of being just the two of them against the world. Lucas drained the pasta and started mixing in the cheese sauce he'd made from scratch, because the boxed kind never tasted quite right. Evan set the table without being asked, putting out 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 napkins folded the way Lucas had taught him years ago. When they sat down to eat, Evan was quiet for the first few bites. Then he looked up at his father with that particular expression that meant he'd been thinking about something important. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you stop being an engineer?" Lucas's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. It wasn't the first time Evan had asked variations of this question, but usually the boy phrased it differently, more carefully. This directness caught Lucas off guard. "You know why?" Lucas said slowly. "When your mom left, I had to make choices about what mattered most. You mattered most. But you could have been both, right? An engineer and my dad." Lucas set down his fork. "It's complicated, kiddo. The kind of engineering work I was doing required a lot of hours, a lot of travel. I couldn't be the parent you needed and maintain that career at the same time." Evan pushed mac and cheese around his plate. "Some of the kids at school, their parents are doctors and lawyers and stuff. They manage. Some people have help, family nearby, nannies, partners who share the load. We didn't have that. Because Mom left." "Yes." Evan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you miss it? Engineering?" Lucas looked at his son, 12 years old, and already asking questions that cut straight to the bone. He thought about the notebooks in his closet, the designs he still worked on late at night when sleep wouldn't come, the Mustang sitting in the parking lot with an engine that represented everything he'd given up and everything he'd secretly kept alive. "Sometimes," Lucas admitted, "but I've never missed it more than I valued being your father. That's the truth, Evan. Every choice I made, I'd make again." Evan seemed to consider this. Then he nodded and went back to eating, satisfied for now. Though Lucas suspected the questions would come back in different forms as his son got older and started understanding more about sacrifice and regret and the complicated mathematics of adult life. After dinner, Evan retreated to his room to finish homework while Lucas cleaned the kitchen. The routine was soothing in its predictability. Wash the dishes, wipe the counters, put everything back in its place. Make order out of chaos, even if the order was temporary and the chaos always waiting to return. His phone rang just as he was drying the last plate. Lucas checked the screen and saw a number he recognized from Meridian's internal directory. His supervisor calling at 8 o'clock on a weeknight. That was never good. "This is Lucas." "Lucas, it's Margaret. I'm sorry to bother you at home, but we've got a situation. The 3rd floor conference room, the big one where Ms. Chen's hosting that investor dinner tomorrow, there's been a water leak from the floor above. Ceiling tiles came down, carpet soaked. We need someone to come in tonight and help with emergency cleanup, otherwise there's no way we'll be ready for tomorrow." Lucas closed his eyes. Through the wall, he could hear Evan's music playing softly in his room. "What time do you need me?" "Soon as you can get here. I know it's last minute, and I'll make sure you get overtime plus a comp day, but I'll be there in 30 minutes. You're a lifesaver, Lucas. Thank you." He ended the call and stood in his kitchen for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settling across his shoulders. Then he walked down the hall to Evan's room and knocked on the door. "Yeah?" Lucas opened the door. Evan was at his desk, math book open, pencil moving across paper with the careful precision of a boy who actually cared about getting the answers right. "I have to go back to work," Lucas said. "Emergency cleanup. I shouldn't be more than a few hours." Evan's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "Okay, I'll be fine. Homework done by 9, lights out by 9:30. You know the rules." "I know, Dad. I'm 12, not 6. Lucas smiled. "Text me if you need anything. And Evan, lock the door behind me." "I will." 20 minutes later, Lucas was pulling into Meridian's parking lot for the second time that day. The building looked different at night, lit from within like some kind of technological cathedral, all those glass walls glowing against the dark sky. Only a few cars remained in the lot. Margaret's ancient Honda, a BMW that probably belonged to one of the executives working late, and now Lucas's Mustang, ugly and out of place even in the darkness. He parked in the back lot out of habit and made his way to the employee entrance. Margaret was waiting for him in the break room, already dressed in work clothes, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired in the way that people who'd been doing the same job for 20 years always look tired. Not exhausted exactly, but worn down by the steady accumulation of small indignities and thankless tasks. "Lucas, thank God. Come on, I'll show you the damage." They took the service elevator to the 3rd floor. Margaret filled him in on the details as they rose. A burst pipe in a 4th-floor bathroom, water running for who knew how long before someone noticed. The whole mess cascading down into the conference room that Victoria Chen needed perfect by tomorrow afternoon. "How bad is it?" Lucas asked. "Bad enough that I called you. I've got 2 other guys coming in around 10, but I wanted to get started on the extraction before the water soaks in any deeper." The elevator doors opened onto the 3rd floor, and Margaret led him down the hallway Lucas had mopped just hours earlier. As they approached the conference room, he could hear the steady drip of water and smell that particular damp odor that meant real damage, not just surface mess. Margaret pushed open the conference room door, and Lucas saw the extent of the problem. Water covered half the carpet, pooling in the low spots. 3 ceiling tiles had collapsed completely, leaving gaping holes that still dripped steadily. The long conference table had been moved to one side, but water had gotten underneath it, warping the expensive wood veneer on the base. "Jesus," Lucas muttered. "Yeah, we've got the water shut off upstairs, but this is going to take most of the night to clean up properly. Think we can do it?" Lucas was already mentally calculating the work. Extract the water first, pull up the damaged carpet, dry out the subfloor, patch the ceiling, replace the tiles. 6 hours minimum, maybe 8. "We can do it," he said, "but it's going to be close." They got to work. Lucas had done emergency cleanups before, but this one felt different somehow. Maybe it was the late hour, or the pressure of knowing that Victoria Chen's important investor dinner depended on his ability to make this disaster disappear, or just the accumulated weight of the entire day pressing down on him. Whatever it was, he felt it in his shoulders as he dragged the industrial water extractor across the soaked carpet, in his knees as he knelt to pull up damaged sections, in his back as he carried bucket after bucket of dirty water to dump in the service sink. Margaret worked beside him without complaint, and when the other 2 janitors arrived at 10, the 4 of them formed an efficient team that moved through the space with practiced coordination. Nobody talked much, there wasn't energy for conversation when the work demanded everything, but there was a kind of solidarity in the shared effort, a recognition that they were the people who made everything work even when everything was falling apart. Around midnight, Margaret sent the other 2 janitors home. The worst of the water was gone, and what remained was detailed work that didn't require 4 sets of hands. She and Lucas kept going, patching ceiling tiles, shampooing the sections of carpet that could be saved, setting up industrial fans to dry everything out. "You didn't have to stay," Lucas told Margaret around 1 in the morning. "I can finish the rest." "I know," she said, running a damp cloth over the conference table to remove water spots. "But we're a team. Besides, my husband's working night shift at the hospital. House is empty anyway." They worked in silence for a while longer. Then Margaret paused and looked at Lucas with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Lucas set down the ceiling tile he'd been installing. Okay. What's a guy like you doing pushing a mop? You're overqualified for this work by a mile. I've seen how you handle the equipment, how you think through problems. You've got an engineering mind, Lucas. So what happened? Lucas was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room windows, the city stretched away in patterns of light and darkness. 1 million people living their lives without any idea that 4 floors below them, 2 janitors were saving Victoria Chen's investor dinner. I made choices, Lucas said finally, and those choices led me here. That's all. Margaret nodded, accepting the non-answer. Well, for what it's worth, you're the best janitor I've ever supervised, and I've been doing this job for 23 years, so that means something. Thanks, Margaret. Don't thank me, just stating facts. She went back to wiping down the table. You know what kills me about this job? Not the hours, not the work itself. It's the invisibility. We keep this whole place running, and nobody sees us. We're here before they arrive, gone after they leave. We fix their messes, clean their spaces, make sure everything works, and they walk right past us like we're furniture. Lucas thought about Victoria Chen that morning, about the investors laughing at his car, about the folder on her desk containing his stolen design. Some people only see what they're looking for, he said quietly, and they're not looking for us. That's the truth right there. Margaret straightened up, surveying the conference room with a critical eye. I think we're done. It's not perfect, but it'll pass inspection. Nobody's going to know there was a disaster here 6 hours ago. Lucas looked around the space. She was right. The ceiling was patched. The carpet was drying evenly under the fans. The water stains were gone. The furniture was back in place. By tomorrow afternoon, Victoria Chen would walk in here with her investors and never know that her event had been saved by 2 janitors working through the night. Good work, he said to Margaret. You too. Now go home and get some sleep. You look exhausted. Lucas checked his watch, 1:45 in the morning. Evan would be asleep, and Lucas would need to be back here in less than 5 hours for his regular shift. He gathered his tools and headed for the elevator. The building was completely silent now, all the important people long gone. Just the hum of the HVAC system and the soft whir of computers that never fully shut down. Lucas rode down to the ground floor alone, his reflection staring back at him from the polished elevator walls. A tired man in his 40s wearing clothes that smelled like damp carpet and cleaning solution. The parking lot was almost empty when he emerged, just his Mustang sitting under a streetlight, patient and ugly and waiting. Lucas walked toward it slowly, his body aching in ways that reminded him he wasn't 25 anymore, that physical labor took a different toll in your 40s than it did when you were young. He was halfway to the car when he heard voices. Lucas stopped, looked around, saw 2 figures standing near the executive entrance, silhouetted against the building's lobby lights. He recognized one of them immediately. Victoria Chen's distinctive posture, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, like she was always about to walk into the next challenge. The other person was taller, male, wearing what looked like an expensive suit even at this distance. Their voices carried across the empty lot, and Lucas couldn't help but hear them, even though he knew he shouldn't listen. The numbers are solid, Victoria. You present tomorrow, and we'll have the financing locked down by end of week. This propulsion system is going to make Meridian the leader in sustainable transportation for the next decade. That was the tall man. His voice had the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never had to choose between his career and his child, never cleaned a floor in his life. I know the numbers are solid, Victoria replied. I ran the analysis myself, but we need to be prepared for questions about development timeline. Some of these investors are going to want to know why it took us 8 years to bring this to market after the initial patent. Tell them what you always tell them. Perfection takes time. You built something revolutionary, Victoria. Own it. Lucas felt his hands clench. He forced them to relax. You're right, Victoria said. This is my design. I know it inside and out. I can handle any questions they throw at me. The tall man laughed. That's the CEO I know. Confident, brilliant, unstoppable. Come on, let me buy you a drink. We should celebrate before the big presentation. Their voices faded as they walked toward the parking lot where the BMW sat waiting. Lucas watched them go, watched Victoria Chen climb into the passenger seat without a backward glance at the building where two janitors had just saved her investor dinner, where a man whose design she'd stolen was standing in the shadows feeling something cold and hard crystallize in his chest. The BMW's engine purred to life. Smooth, quiet, expensive. It pulled out of the lot and disappeared into the night, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts and his battered Mustang and the particular kind of rage that came from being invisible to people who owed you everything. He got into his car and sat there for a long moment without starting the engine. Then he pulled out his phone and did something he told himself he wouldn't do. He unblocked the lawyer's number and typed out a text message. "We should talk, but not on the phone. Meet me somewhere private." The response came back almost immediately, despite the late hour. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Perkins Coffee on 4th Street. I'll be in the back booth." Lucas stared at the message. Then he deleted the entire conversation again and sat in the darkness of his car, trying to figure out if he'd just made a terrible mistake or the first smart decision in 13 years. Finally, he started the engine. That perfect hum filled the car, and Lucas put his hand on the gear shift and felt the subtle vibration of machinery that represented everything he'd lost and everything he still was, underneath the janitor's uniform, and the invisibility and the choices that had brought him to this moment. He drove home through empty streets, past closed businesses and dark houses where normal people were sleeping normal hours. When he parked in front of his apartment building, he sat for another moment before going inside. Checked his phone one more time, saw a text from Evan, sent at 9:30 exactly. "Homework done. Lights out. Love you, Dad." Lucas closed his eyes and felt the cold, hard thing in his chest soften slightly. Not disappear, it was too late for that, but soften enough that he could breathe around it. He went inside, checked on Evan, asleep in his bed, one arm thrown over his head the way he'd slept since he was a baby, and then went to his own room. Instead of sleeping, he pulled out the notebooks from his closet and opened them to the pages he'd drawn 13 years ago. The hybrid propulsion system that Victoria Chen called her design. The engine that was about to make Meridian billions more. The innovation that Lucas had created and lost and then rebuilt in secret in the Mustang that everyone mocked. He stared at his own handwriting, his own calculations, his own genius that the world had decided wasn't worth recognizing. Then Lucas turned to a blank page and started sketching something new. Not because he needed to prove anything, not because he wanted revenge, but because creation was who he was, underneath everything else, and that was something Victoria Chen could never steal no matter how many patents she filed or presentations she gave. Lucas worked until dawn, filling pages with designs that would never make him rich, solving problems that no one had asked him to solve, being the engineer he'd always been, even when the world had decided he was just a janitor. When his alarm went off at 5:30, he closed the notebook and put it back in the closet. Then he showered, dressed in his work clothes, and made breakfast for Evan, who stumbled into the kitchen looking sleepy and young and completely unaware that his father had just spent the night deciding whether to burn down the careful life they'd built. "You look tired, Dad," Evan observed, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Late night at work," Lucas said. "Water leak. Had to do emergency cleanup." "Did you fix it?" "Yeah, we fixed it." "Of course you did." Evan said it with complete certainty, the way children talked about their parents before the world taught them that adults were fallible. "You can fix anything." Lucas felt something crack in his chest again, that same feeling he'd had at the science fair. He walked over and ruffled Evan's hair, and his son squirmed away with a laugh. "Finish your breakfast. You're going to be late." An hour later, Lucas was pulling into Meridian's parking lot for what felt like the 100th time. He parked in his usual spot in the back, far from the executive spaces, and sat for a moment looking at the building where Victoria Chen would soon arrive to prepare for her presentation. The presentation about her revolutionary design, her innovation, her genius. Lucas's phone buzzed, a text from the lawyer. "Still on for 6 p.m.? Lucas stared at the message. Thought about Evan, about their quiet life, about the safety of invisibility and the danger of being seen. Thought about justice and whether it was worth the risk. Thought about 13 years of silence and what it had cost him and whether the bill was finally coming due. He typed back, "Yes." Then he got out of his car and walked into Meridian Technologies, where he would spend the next 8 hours being invisible to people who would never know his name, never recognize his contribution, never understand what it meant to sacrifice everything and still keep creating because that was who you were at your core. But tonight, at 6 o'clock, in a coffee shop on 4th Street, Lucas Reed was going to start being seen again. And once that happened, there would be no going back to the careful invisibility that had kept him and Evan safe for 3 years. Lucas pushed through the employee entrance and headed for the supply closet to get his cart. Margaret was already there, looking almost as tired as Lucas felt. "Morning," she said. "Thanks again for last night. I put in the overtime and comp day. You earned it." "Thanks, Margaret. Conference room looks perfect, by the way. I checked first thing. You'd never know anything happened." "That's the job," Lucas said, "making problems disappear." Margaret looked at him with that same unreadable expression she'd worn last night. "You okay, Lucas? You seem different today." Lucas loaded cleaning supplies onto his cart. "Just tired. Long night." "Yeah, well, take it easy today if you can. You've earned a break." Lucas nodded and pushed his cart toward the elevator. As he rode up to the 3rd floor to begin his daily routine of making everything perfect for people who would never see him, he thought about the meeting tonight, about the lawyer who wanted to ask questions, about the patents and the theft, and the 13 years of silence that might finally be ending. The elevator doors opened, and Lucas stepped out into the familiar hallway. But nothing felt familiar anymore. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. The 3rd floor was already buzzing with activity when Lucas arrived. Executive assistants rushed past him carrying presentation materials. IT staff wrestled with projection equipment in the main conference room, and someone from catering was setting up coffee stations in the hallway. Victoria Chen's investor presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock, and the entire floor hummed with the nervous energy of people whose jobs depended on everything going perfectly. Lucas moved through the chaos like a ghost, pushing his cart from office to office, emptying trash bins and wiping surfaces while conversations happened around him as if he wasn't there. He'd become so good at invisibility that sometimes he forgot he was doing it, forgot that the way people's eyes slid past him was a skill he'd deliberately cultivated rather than some natural law of the universe. Around 10:30, he was cleaning the small break room near Victoria's office when he heard her voice, sharp with stress, cutting through the general commotion. "I don't care what the schedule says, Gerald. I need that updated market analysis in my hands in the next 20 minutes, or we're going into this presentation blind on the European projections." "Ms. Chen, the team is working as fast as they can, but then they need to work faster. This is a $2 billion deal we're talking about. Fast isn't good enough. Perfect is the minimum acceptable standard." Lucas kept his head down, spraying cleaner on the already clean countertop and wiping it in slow, methodical circles. Through the doorway, he could see Victoria pacing in her office, phone pressed to her ear, that same forward-leaning posture that made her look like she was perpetually charging into battle. She was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost what Lucas made in 2 months. Her hair pulled back in a style that looked effortless, but had probably taken professional assistance to achieve. Everything about her screamed competence, control, success. Looking at her, you'd never guess that the foundation of her empire had been built on someone else's stolen work. Lucas finished the break room and moved on. The morning crawled past in its usual way, offices cleaned, surfaces polished, trash removed, the physical evidence of important work disposed of so that new important work could begin. He saw Victoria 3 more times before lunch, always in motion, always on her phone, or issuing instructions or reviewing documents with that intense focus that had made her a celebrated CEO. Not once did she look at him. Not once did her gaze register his presence in any meaningful way. Lucas had cleaned her office, emptied her trash, walked past her in hallways at least 1,000 times over 3 years, and he doubted she could describe what he looked like if someone asked. At noon, Lucas took his lunch break in the back parking lot, sitting in his Mustang with a sandwich he'd thrown together that morning while Evan ate breakfast. The car smelled like old upholstery and the faint ghost of his father's cologne, a scent Lucas had long since stopped consciously noticing, but that still lived somewhere in the fabric and the vinyl, refusing to fade completely. He pulled out his phone and stared at the lawyer's last text. "Still on for 6 p.m.? Lucas had confirmed, had committed himself to a path that terrified him for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. It wasn't just about the risk to his job or the potential complications. It was about something deeper, about spending 13 years telling himself that none of it mattered, that he'd made peace with the theft, that being Evan's father was worth more than any recognition or justice. Meeting with the lawyer meant admitting that maybe he hadn't made peace after all. Maybe the wound was still open, still bleeding, still demanding attention he'd been too afraid to give it. Lucas was halfway through his sandwich when his phone rang. Evan's school. His heart jumped immediately into emergency mode. The instinct of every single parent who knew that unexpected calls during school hours rarely meant good news. "This is Lucas Reed." "Mr. Reed, this is Principal Morrison. Everything's fine, but I wanted to let you know that Evan's teacher recommended him for the district science competition based on his project from yesterday's fair. It's a significant honor, and it comes with a college scholarship opportunity if he places in the top 3. Lucas felt tension drain from his shoulders. "That's wonderful. When is it?" 2 weeks from tomorrow, Saturday afternoon at the convention center. I'm emailing you the details now. Evan will need to refine his presentation and prepare for more advanced questioning from the judges, but Mrs. Patterson thinks he's more than capable. "He is," Lucas said quietly. "Thank you for letting me know." "Of course. And Mr. Reed, I've taught a lot of students over the years. Your son is special. Whatever you're doing as a parent, keep doing it." The call ended and Lucas sat in his car feeling a complicated mix of pride and fear. Pride, because Evan was brilliant and hardworking and deserved every opportunity. Fear because opportunities came with expectations, and expectations came with the possibility of disappointment, and Lucas knew too well what it felt like to have your best efforts dismissed as not quite good enough. He finished his sandwich and headed back inside. The afternoon shift passed in the same blur as the morning, cleaning, moving, being present but unseen while other people prepared for their important moment. Around 1:30, Lucas was vacuuming the executive conference room one final time when Margaret stuck her head in the door. "Looking good, Lucas. I think we're ready. Ms. Chen's presentation starts in 30 minutes. "Everything should be perfect," Lucas said, surveying the space they'd rescued from disaster less than 24 hours earlier. The carpet showed no trace of water damage. The ceiling tiles sat flush and clean. The conference table gleamed under the overhead lights. You'd never know that at 2 in the morning, this room had been a waterlogged mess. "Thanks to you," Margaret said. "Now get out of here before the investors start arriving. Ms. Chen wants all service staff clear of the floor during the presentation." Lucas nodded and wheeled his vacuum toward the service elevator. As he waited for it to arrive, he could hear voices approaching from the main hallway. Investors arriving early, probably, eager to see what innovation Victoria Chen was about to unveil. He stepped into the elevator just as they rounded the corner, and the last thing he saw before the doors closed was Victoria herself, radiant and confident, greeting a group of men in expensive suits with the kind of warm professionalism that made people want to give her money. The elevator descended, and Lucas rode it all the way to the basement level where the custodial offices were located. He had 3 hours before his shift ended, 3 hours before he needed to leave for his meeting with the lawyer. He spent them doing inventory on cleaning supplies, restocking his cart for tomorrow, helping Margaret process a supply order, all the mundane tasks that kept the invisible machinery of the building running. At 4:30, he clocked out and headed for the parking lot. The executive level was still in session. He could see lights blazing in the conference room windows, could imagine Victoria Chen in there making her pitch, selling his innovation as her own, collecting praise and promises of billions of dollars based on work she'd stolen. Lucas got into his Mustang and sat with his hands on the steering wheel, not starting the engine yet. He thought about driving away, about texting the lawyer that he'd changed his mind, about going home to Evan and pretending that everything was fine. The safe choice, the invisible choice, the choice that would keep his life exactly as it had been for 3 years. Instead, he turned the key. The engine came alive with that perfect hum, and Lucas pulled out of the parking lot. He had 90 minutes before his meeting with the lawyer. He drove aimlessly for a while, through neighborhoods he barely saw, past storefronts and parks, and all the ordinary pieces of a city going about its afternoon business. Eventually, he found himself pulling into the parking lot of Evan's school, even though he knew his son had left hours ago to go to his friend Marcus's house for the afternoon. Lucas parked near the playground and watched kids who weren't Evan running and climbing and laughing with the unselfconscious joy that came before life got complicated. He remembered Evan at that age, before his mother left, Before Lucas had to choose between engineering and fatherhood, back when the future still felt wide open and full of possibilities that didn't require sacrifice. His phone buzzed. A text from Evan. "Marcus's mom is ordering pizza. Can I stay for dinner?" Lucas smiled and typed back, "Sure. Home by 8. Love you." "Love you too, Dad." So Lucas had the evening to himself. No dinner to cook, no homework to supervise, nothing to anchor him to the routines that normally kept him from thinking too hard about the life he might have had. Just him in a meeting with a lawyer who wanted to ask questions about the past Lucas had spent 13 years burying. At 5:45, Lucas pulled into the parking lot of Perkins Coffee on 4th Street. The place was half full with the after-work crowd. People in business casual getting their caffeine fix before heading home. A few students with laptops camped out in corners. The usual ambient noise of a coffee shop trying to be all things to all people. Lucas ordered black coffee he didn't want and carried it to the back booth where a man in his 30s sat with a leather portfolio and an expression that tried for friendly but landed somewhere closer to calculating. "Lucas Reed? That's me?" "David Chang, thanks for meeting me." The lawyer stood and extended his hand. Lucas shook it, noting the firm grip and the expensive watch and the general air of someone who'd gone to good schools and knew how to leverage that into a comfortable life. They sat across from each other and David pulled a legal pad from his portfolio. "I want to start by saying I understand this must be difficult. My client, and I can't share their identity yet, has spent considerable resources investigating the origins of Meridian's hybrid propulsion patent. Your name kept coming up in old technical forums, design communities, places where engineers used to share concepts before everything went behind corporate firewalls." Lucas wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "Why does your client care? The patent's been active for years. What's the point of challenging it now?" "Because the technology's about to go mainstream. Meridian's presentation today to investors, actually. They're seeking $2 billion in additional financing to scale production. My client believes that money is being raised on fraudulent grounds, specifically that the core innovation isn't Meridian's to claim." "And you think I'm the real inventor?" David leaned forward slightly. "I don't think, Mr. Reed, I know. I've seen the posts you made in 2011 and 2012 under your real name before you went silent. The conceptual framework for that hybrid propulsion system is clearly yours. The question is why you never pursued it, and why you're working as a janitor instead of claiming what's rightfully yours." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the coffee shop hummed with conversation and the hiss of espresso machines and all the ordinary sounds of people living ordinary lives. He thought about Evan, about the choices he'd made, about whether this lawyer could possibly understand what it meant to love someone more than your own ambition. "I had a son," Lucas said finally. "His mother left when he was 9 months old. I had custody, no family support, no safety net. The engineering work I was doing required 60, 70-hour weeks. I couldn't do both, be the father Evan needed and maintain that career. So I chose him." "That's admirable," David said, and he sounded like he meant it. "But it doesn't explain why Meridian has a patent on your design. I presented it to them before everything fell apart. I was working freelance doing consultation for their research division. I brought them a hybrid propulsion concept I'd been developing. They said it was too risky, too different from their current direction, rejected it formally." Lucas's hands tightened on the coffee cup. 3 years later, after I'd already left engineering behind, they filed a patent on a system that was 90% identical to what I'd shown them. "Did you keep any documentation, emails, design files, anything that proves you presented it first?" "Some. Not much. When my life imploded, I wasn't thinking about protecting intellectual property. I was thinking about keeping my son fed and housed." David made notes on his legal pad. "What we need is clear proof that your design predates their patent application. The forum posts help, but they're not detailed enough. Do you have the original design files, notebooks, sketches with dates?" Lucas thought about the notebooks in his closet, filled with calculations and drawings from 13 years ago. "Yes. That could be huge, Mr. Reed. With proper documentation, we could challenge the patent, potentially invalidate it entirely. Meridian would owe you not just credit, but a significant portion of the billions they've made off your work. And what would your client get out of this?" David smiled slightly. My client has a competing technology they've been trying to bring to market. Meridian's patent has blocked them at every turn. If we invalidate it, they can move forward with their own innovation. It's business, Mr. Reed. Everyone gets what they need. Except Meridian. Meridian stole your work. Why do you care what happens to them? Lucas looked down at his coffee. Because I work there. Because challenging the patent means exposing myself. And that means losing my job, my health insurance, the stability my son depends on. You're asking me to risk everything on the chance that justice might actually matter in a system designed to protect people like Victoria Chen. Victoria Chen stole from you, David said quietly. She built an empire on your genius and left you to push a mop. Don't you want her to face consequences for that? Lucas did want that. Had wanted it for 3 years while he cleaned her office and emptied her trash and watched her collect awards for innovation she'd stolen. But wanting justice and risking Evan's security were two different calculations entirely. What happens if we lose? Lucas asked. Honestly, Meridian would likely sue you for defamation, corporate espionage, whatever their lawyers could make stick. You'd be unemployable in any technical field. It would be ugly. And if we win, you get credit, money, the recognition you deserve. Your son gets to see that hard work and brilliance actually matter, that theft doesn't always win. David paused. Look, I can't promise this will be easy. Patent challenges are expensive and complicated, but you have something most people in your position don't have, proof. And that matters. Lucas sat with that for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been bothering him since David first called. Why me? If your client wants to challenge the patent, they could do it without me. Why track me down specifically? Because a human story matters more than technical arguments. Judges and juries connect with narratives. A single father who sacrificed his career for his son, who watched someone steal his life's work while he struggled to survive, that's compelling. That changes minds. You want to use me. I want to help you get what's yours. If that also helps my client, then everyone wins except the people who deserve to lose. Lucas's phone buzzed. A text from Evan with a photo attached. His son and Marcus making silly faces over pizza, both boys grinning like the world was simple and good and full of nothing but possibility. I need to think about it, Lucas said. Of course. But Mr. Reed, I should tell you, Meridian's presentation today was apparently very successful. If they secure that $2 billion in financing, the window for challenging the patent gets a lot narrower. Success breeds protection. The bigger they get, the harder they are to fight. David pulled a business card from his portfolio and slid it across the table. Take your time, but not too much time. Sometimes justice has an expiration date. Lucas pocketed the card and stood. They shook hands again, and Lucas left the coffee shop feeling like he'd just stepped off solid ground into water where he couldn't see the bottom. He sat in his Mustang for a long time, not starting the engine, just thinking about choices and consequences and whether 13 years of silence had been noble sacrifice or just cowardice dressed up in parental devotion. Finally, he drove home. Evan was still at Marcus's house, so the apartment was empty and quiet. Lucas went to his bedroom and pulled out the notebooks. He spread them across his bed. Years of designs, calculations, innovations that he'd created late at night while the world slept and his son dreamed in the next room. Every page was dated. Every sketch was signed. The evidence David Chang needed sat right there in blue ink and graphite, waiting for Lucas to decide if justice was worth the risk. He was still staring at the notebooks when his phone rang. Unknown number. Lucas almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Reed? This is Janet Keller from Channel 7 News. I understand you may have information about Meridian Technologies and their proprietary hybrid propulsion system. I'd love to talk to you about it. Lucas's blood went cold. How did you get this number? A source reached out to us suggesting we look into the origins of Meridian's patent. Your name came up. I'm just following leads, Mr. Reed. If there's a story here about corporate theft of intellectual property, the public has a right to know. I have nothing to say. Are you sure? Because if Meridian Technologies built their empire on stolen innovation, that's a major scandal. And if you're the person they stole from, Lucas ended the call and immediately blocked the number. His hands were shaking again. Someone was leaking his name to the press. David's client, probably, trying to force Lucas's hand by making the story public whether he cooperated or not. The phone rang again. Different number. Lucas didn't answer. It rang a third time, fourth, fifth. He turned it off completely and sat in his bedroom surrounded by notebooks that suddenly felt like evidence in a crime he hadn't committed but would be punished for anyway. This was spinning out of control. Whatever David Chang had set in motion by investigating the patent was gaining momentum now, rolling downhill toward an outcome Lucas could no longer predict or control. The question was whether he got ahead of it or got crushed by it. At 7:45, Evan came home full of stories about Marcus and pizza and some video game they'd played. Lucas listened with half his attention, while the other half ran calculations on risk and reward and the probability of various catastrophic outcomes. "Dad, you okay? You seem weird." Lucas focused on his son. "Just tired. Long day." "You're always tired lately." Evan's face showed concern that made him look older than 12. "Is everything okay at work?" "Everything's fine, kiddo. I promise." Evan studied him for another moment, then seemed to accept it. "Okay. Hey, did you hear about the district competition? Principal Morrison called. I'm really proud of you, Evan. Think I can win?" Lucas looked at his son, at that hopeful face, at the brilliance and potential that deserved every opportunity the world could offer. "I think you can do anything you set your mind to." Evan grinned and went to his room to start on homework. Lucas cleaned up from dinner, though he hadn't eaten anything, and tried to figure out what to do next. The reporters would keep calling. David Chang would keep pushing. And somewhere in Meridian Technologies, Victoria Chen was probably celebrating a successful presentation, toasting to billions of dollars raised on innovation she'd stolen, completely unaware that the man who mopped her floor was about to decide whether to burn her empire down. Lucas's phone was still off. He turned it back on and saw 17 missed calls, 12 from numbers he didn't recognize, 5 from David Chang. There was also a text from an unknown number that made his stomach drop. "Mr. Reed, this is Victoria Chen. We need to talk. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., my office. This is not a request." Lucas stared at the message. She knew. Somehow, she already knew that someone was questioning the patent, and she'd connected it to him. The invisibility that had protected him for 3 years had shattered in less than 12 hours. He didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Evan's soft breathing through the thin walls, trying to figure out how everything had gone from carefully controlled to complete chaos in a single day. At some point, his mind must have shut down from exhaustion because he woke with a start at 5 a.m. to the sound of his alarm, feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Lucas got ready for work on autopilot, made breakfast for Evan, drove to Meridian in the pre-dawn darkness, parked in his usual spot in the back lot, and sat there for 10 minutes, gathering courage for whatever was about to happen. At 6:55, he walked into the building through the employee entrance, took the elevator to the 3rd floor, walked past offices that were still dark and empty toward Victoria Chen's corner suite where lights already blazed. Her door was open. She sat behind her desk in the same charcoal suit from yesterday, looking like she hadn't slept either. When Lucas appeared in the doorway, she gestured to the chair across from her without preamble. "Close the door and sit down, Lucas." He did. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, and for the first time in 3 years, Lucas felt actually seen by her, not as furniture or background or invisible infrastructure, but as a person she needed to account for. "I'm going to be very direct with you," she said finally. "A patent attorney contacted me yesterday evening asking questions about the development timeline for our hybrid propulsion system. He specifically mentioned your name in connection with prior art. So I did some research, pulled some very old files, and I found your original presentation from 2012. Lucas's pulse hammered in his ears. "The presentation we rejected," Victoria continued. "The one we told you was too risky, too different from our direction, except apparently someone in research didn't think it was too risky at all. They took your concepts, developed them internally, and 3 years later we filed a patent that She stopped, took a breath. "That I genuinely believed was our internal innovation. I signed off on that patent in good faith, Lucas. I had no idea it originated outside the company." You're saying you didn't know it was stolen. I'm saying someone stole from both of us. You lost credit for your work. I became the face of something I didn't create. Neither of us is innocent in this, but neither of us is the villain either. Lucas wanted to believe her. But 13 years of bitterness didn't evaporate just because Victoria Chen looked tired and used the word we. Why am I here? He asked. Because this patent challenge is going to happen whether we want it or not. The lawyer who contacted me said his client is moving forward regardless. And when it does, this all becomes public. Your name, my name, Meridian's reputation, everything gets dragged through a very ugly, very expensive legal battle. She leaned forward. Or we settle it now before it gets there. I give you credit, back pay for the value you created, a position in the company that actually reflects your capabilities. In exchange, you help us demonstrate to the patent office that we're correcting a mistake rather than committing fraud. You want me to save you? I want us to save each other. You think I don't know what people will say when this goes public? That I'm incompetent? That I didn't do my due diligence? That I built my reputation on someone else's work? My career's over either way, Lucas, but I'd rather it end with me doing the right thing than with me fighting a legal battle I'm going to lose. Lucas studied her face, looking for deception and finding only exhaustion. Why should I believe you didn't know? Why shouldn't I think you're just trying to minimize damage now that you're caught? Because 3 years ago, I hired you. Victoria's voice was quiet now. I saw your resume when you applied for the custodial position. Former engineer, freelance work for tech companies, gap in employment explained as family obligations. I knew who you were, Lucas. I knew you'd worked with us before, and I hired you anyway because I thought you deserved a second chance, even if it wasn't in engineering. Lucas felt like the floor had shifted under him. You knew the whole time? I knew you were a capable engineer who'd fallen on hard times. I didn't connect you to the propulsion system because I'd never seen the original presentation. Different division, different team. But when that lawyer mentioned your name yesterday, I went digging, and I found everything. She opened a folder on her desk and turned it toward Lucas. Inside were copies of his presentation from 2012, the patent application from 2015, email chain showing how research staff had repurposed his concepts without attribution, without payment, without anything resembling proper credit. This is theft, Victoria said flatly. It happened on my watch, in my company, under my leadership. I take responsibility for that, and I want to make it right. Not because I'm afraid of the lawsuit, though I am, but because it's the right thing to do. Lucas stared at the documents. His own work, stolen and repackaged and sold as someone else's innovation. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, impossible to deny. And Victoria Chen, the woman he'd spent 3 years resenting, was handing it to him like a weapon she expected him to use. What exactly are you offering? Lucas asked. Full credit as the original designer. 15% equity in Meridian, retroactive to the patent filing. That's worth approximately $300 million at current valuation. And a position as chief engineer with complete creative control over propulsion development going forward. Lucas's mind couldn't process numbers that large. $300 million. Everything he and Evan would ever need, forever. College paid for, security guaranteed, a future so stable it almost didn't feel real. And what do you get? He asked. I get to keep my company. I get to tell our investors that we discovered an error and corrected it honorably. I get to sleep at night knowing I didn't spend the rest of my life profiting from someone else's stolen work. She paused. And maybe I get to stop being the person who only sees the janitor when he's about to sue her. Lucas sat back in his chair. Through Victoria's window, he could see the sunrise starting to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Evan was probably just waking up, getting ready for school, thinking about the district science competition and whether his dad would be proud of him no matter what happened. I need conditions, Lucas said. Name them. Family first schedule. I don't work weekends unless it's absolutely critical. I'm home for dinner every night. Evan comes first, always. Done. Creative control means creative control. I don't present designs to committees for approval. If you hire me to innovate, you let me innovate. Agreed. And one more thing. Every custodial staff member in this building gets a raise, 20% effective immediately. Because the people who keep this place running deserve better than minimum wage and invisibility. Victoria's lips quirked into something almost like a smile. You're negotiating for janitors when I'm offering you $300 million? Those janitors saved your investor presentation yesterday. Margaret and I worked until 2 in the morning cleaning up a water leak so your conference room would be perfect. Nobody thanked us. Nobody even noticed. That changes, or I walk away from all of it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. 20% raise for custodial staff, and I'll thank them personally. You have my word. She extended her hand across the desk. Lucas looked at it, the hand of a woman who'd stolen his work, who'd benefited from his silence, who was now offering him everything he'd lost and more. He thought about David Chang and his client who wanted to use Lucas's story as a weapon. He thought about the reporters who would tear into this scandal whether Lucas participated or not. He thought about justice and revenge and the complicated mathematics of what people actually deserved. Then he thought about Evan, about providing security and stability and a future where his son never had to choose between dreams and survival the way Lucas had. Lucas reached across the desk and shook Victoria's hand. We have a deal, he said. Victoria's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. I'll have legal draw up the paperwork today. In the meantime, I want you to see something. She stood and walked to her window, gesturing for Lucas to join her. Together, they looked down at the parking lot where his battered Mustang sat among the sleek executive vehicles, ugly and out of place, and somehow still there despite everything. That's a 67, right? Victoria asked. 67 Mustang, my father's car. Does it run as badly as it looks? Lucas felt something crack open in his chest. Not the painful kind of breaking, but the kind that let light in after years of darkness. Actually, he said quietly, it runs better than anything else in this parking lot, including your Mercedes. Victoria looked at him with raised eyebrows. That's a bold claim. It's a true one. That car has the prototype of your hybrid propulsion system under the hood. I've been testing it for 5 years. Every innovation your engineers have been trying to achieve in the lab, I did in my garage. You're serious? Completely. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional mask she wore for investors and employees. Lucas Reed, I think you and I are going to do great work together. But first, you're going to show me that engine. They left her office and walked through the building that was just starting to wake up. Early arrivals trickling in, coffee brewing, computers humming to life. People stared as they passed, the CEO and the janitor walking side by side toward the parking lot, and Lucas could feel the invisibility finally, completely falling away. When they reached his Mustang, Lucas opened the hood. Victoria looked inside and went completely still. Oh my God, she breathed. The engine sat there in the morning light, battered and jury-rigged and utterly brilliant. Every component had been modified, refined, perfected through years of late-night work. It looked nothing like the clean, production-ready systems in Meridian's lab, but the design was unmistakable. The same hybrid architecture, the same elegant efficiency, the same revolutionary approach to propulsion that was about to change the industry. Turn it on, Victoria said quietly. Lucas got into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine came alive with that perfect hum, and suddenly other people were stopping to look. Employees arriving for work, executives pulling into their spaces, security guards doing morning rounds. They gathered around the Mustang that they'd probably mocked 1,000 times, and they listened to the sound of an engine that was worth $2 billion running in a car they'd dismissed as junk. Victoria stood with her hand on the hood, feeling the vibration of perfected machinery, and when she looked up at Lucas, there was something like wonder in her eyes. This changes everything, she said. Everything. Lucas turned off the engine and got out. The crowd had grown, 20 people now, maybe more, all of them staring at his car with new understanding. He saw Margaret in the crowd, her face showing complete shock. Saw some of the executives from yesterday's investor meeting. Saw the security guard who'd worked at Meridian longer than Lucas had been alive. And standing at the edge of the crowd, having just arrived for school drop-off early because of a project he needed to work on in the library, was Evan. His son stood there holding his backpack, staring at his father with wide eyes, clearly trying to understand what was happening. why everyone was gathered around their car, why the CEO was shaking Dad's hand like they were equals. Lucas met his son's eyes across the parking lot and smiled. Then he walked over and pulled Evan into a hug. "Dad?" Evan whispered. "What's going on?" "Something that should have happened a long time ago," Lucas said quietly. "I'll explain everything later. But kiddo, that science project we worked on together? It just became a lot more important than either of us realized." Evan looked past his father at the crowd, at Victoria Chen examining their car, at the impossible scene unfolding in the parking lot. "Did we win, Dad?" Lucas thought about 13 years of silence, 3 years of invisibility, a lifetime of choosing his son over his ambition and never once regretting it. He thought about justice finally arriving, not because he demanded it, but because sometimes the truth was too big to stay buried forever. "Yeah," Lucas said, pulling his son close. "We won." The crowd in the parking lot slowly dispersed as people realized they'd be late for work if they kept staring at the janitor's car. But Lucas could feel the shift in how they looked at him now. Not through him, not past him, but at him. Actually seeing him for the first time in 3 years. It was disorienting, like suddenly becoming visible after spending so long as a ghost. Evan was still holding onto his backpack straps, his knuckles white with tension. "Dad, I'm confused. What just happened?" Lucas knelt down to his son's level, aware that Victoria was giving them space but still close enough to hear. "Remember how we talked about the engine in our car? How I told you I'd built it myself?" "Yeah. You said it was like a hobby project." "It was more than that. It was actually something I designed a long time ago, before you were born. And the company where I worked as a janitor, they used that design without giving me credit for it. Ms. Chen just found out about it and she's making it right." Evan's eyes went wide. "They stole from you?" "It's complicated, but yes, essentially." "That's not fair." Evan's voice had that edge of righteous anger that 12-year-olds brought to injustice, that certainty that wrong should be punished and right should win. "You should sue them or something." Victoria stepped forward then, and Lucas stood up. She looked at Evan with an expression that was hard to read, part guilt, part respect, part something else Lucas couldn't quite identify. "Your father is an extraordinarily talented man," she said to Evan. "And you're right. What happened to him wasn't fair. But sometimes fixing unfairness doesn't require lawsuits. Sometimes it just requires people admitting they were wrong and making it right." Evan studied her with the same intensity he brought to science problems. "Are you making it right?" "I'm trying to. Your dad and I have an agreement. He's going to come work for me as chief engineer, and we're going to make sure everyone knows that the technology we've been building came from his brilliant mind." "So Dad's not going to be a janitor anymore?" "Not unless he wants to be," Victoria said with a slight smile. "Though I suspect he's got better things to do with his time." Evan turned to Lucas. "Does this mean we're rich?" Lucas felt his face flush. "We're going to be okay financially, yes. Very okay. But that's not what matters most about this, Evan. What matters is that the truth came out, that integrity matters, that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, eventually gets recognized. And that your father," Victoria added quietly, "chose you over everything else. That matters too." Lucas met her eyes and saw genuine respect there. Whatever else happened, whatever complications arose from this deal they'd struck, at least Victoria understood what his choices had cost him. "I should get you to school," Lucas said to Evan. "You've got that library project to work on. Can we talk about this more tonight? Like, everything?" "Everything," Lucas promised. "But right now, you need to focus on school. This can all wait a few hours." Evan nodded and headed toward the school bus stop that was visible from the parking lot. Lucas watched him go, then turned back to Victoria. "Thank you," he said, "for what you said to him. I meant it. You gave up a career most engineers would kill for because you put your son first. That's not something I see often in this industry." She paused. "My office, 9 o'clock. We'll start working out the details with legal. And Lucas, you might want to change out of your work uniform. You're not part of custodial staff anymore." Lucas looked down at his janitor's uniform, the name patch over his pocket, the worn fabric that smelled faintly of cleaning solutions. He'd worn variations of this uniform for 3 years, had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing anything that becomes part of your daily routine. "I'll go home and change," he said. Victoria nodded and walked back toward the building, already on her phone, already moving on to the next crisis or opportunity or whatever demanded her attention. Lucas watched her go, then got back into his Mustang and sat there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened in the span of an hour. His phone buzzed. David Chang, the lawyer, heard from Victoria Chen's office. "They're proposing a settlement. Want to talk before you sign anything?" Lucas stared at the message. Part of him wanted to loop David in, to make sure he wasn't being taken advantage of, to have someone on his side who understood patent law and corporate negotiations. But another part of him, the part that had shaken Victoria's hand and seen genuine contrition in her eyes, felt like bringing in an aggressive lawyer would poison whatever fragile trust they were building. He typed back, "I appreciate your help, but I'm handling this directly with Meridian. Thank you for reaching out initially." The response came quickly. "Your call. But Lucas, be careful. CEOs don't get to be CEOs by being nice. Make sure you have everything in writing." Lucas pocketed his phone and drove home. The apartment felt different when he walked in, though nothing had physically changed. Same worn furniture, same scuffed floors, same view of the parking lot where his neighbors' cars sat in their assigned spaces. But Lucas moved through it differently now, seeing it not as the limit of what he could provide for Evan, but as a chapter that was ending, a temporary stop on a journey that was finally moving forward again. He showered and changed into clothes he hadn't worn in years, khakis and a button-down shirt that had been pushed to the back of his closet, saved for occasions that never seemed to arrive. They were slightly tight across the shoulders, evidence of 3 years of physical labor that had changed his body in ways sitting at a drafting table never had. But they'd do until he could buy new ones. At 8:45, Lucas drove back to Meridian. This time he parked near the executive entrance instead of slinking to the back lot. He walked through the lobby where the receptionist actually looked up and smiled at him, past the security desk where the guard nodded in recognition, into the elevator that carried him up to the 3rd floor where he'd spent countless hours making other people's lives easier. Victoria's executive assistant, a woman named Janitor, who'd never once acknowledged Lucas's existence in 3 years, stood up when he approached. "Mr. Reed, Ms. Chen is expecting you. Go right in." The Mr. Reed hit differently than it should have. Lucas had been Lucas, or the janitor, or nothing at all for so long that hearing his surname spoken with respect felt like putting on a coat that didn't quite fit yet. Victoria's office was full when he entered. She sat behind her desk flanked by 2 people Lucas didn't recognize, a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit and wire-rimmed glasses, and a woman about Victoria's age with sharp eyes and a leather portfolio that probably cost more than Lucas used to make in a month. "Lucas, thank you for coming. This is Gerald Whitmore, our head of legal, and Sarah Kim. She handles our corporate communications." Victoria gestured to the empty chair. "Please sit. We have a lot to discuss." Lucas sat. Gerald immediately opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. "Mr. Reed, I've drafted a preliminary agreement based on the terms Ms. Chen outlined this morning. 15% equity in Meridian Technologies, retroactive to the patent filing date. Based on current valuation, that's approximately $320 million. You'll also receive the title of Chief Engineer with full creative control over propulsion development, salary commensurate with a C-level executive position, and a comprehensive benefits package." Lucas's eyes scanned the document. The legal language was dense, but the numbers were clear enough to make his head spin. "There's also a clause here about non-disclosure," Lucas said, finding the section buried in the middle pages. "I can't discuss the circumstances of the original patent filing with anyone outside this company?" Gerald nodded. "Standard protection. We're correcting an internal error, but we don't want the details becoming public in a way that damages Meridian's reputation or creates legal exposure. So I can't tell people that my work was stolen." You can tell people that there was a miscommunication about attribution that we've since corrected," Sarah interjected smoothly. "The narrative we're crafting is that you did freelance work for us years ago. The handoff wasn't properly documented, and when the error came to light, we immediately made it right. That's the truth, just framed in a way that doesn't invite lawsuits or regulatory scrutiny." Lucas looked at Victoria. "Is this what making it right looks like? Rewriting history so nobody looks bad?" "It's what keeping your company solvent looks like," Victoria said evenly. "If we frame this as deliberate theft, Our investors will pull funding, our partners will terminate contracts, and Meridian will be destroyed in the ensuing scandal. 3,000 people work here, Lucas. They didn't steal from you. They didn't do anything wrong, but they'll lose their jobs if we handle this poorly. So I protect the company that benefited from stealing my work. You protect the people who had nothing to do with it. The engineers in the lab, the assembly workers, the custodial staff you were just negotiating raises for. They're the ones who suffer if this turns into a public crucifixion of Meridian. Victoria leaned forward. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to tell the truth in a way that doesn't destroy innocent people's livelihoods. Lucas sat back in his chair. She was right, and he hated that she was right. The cleanest version of justice, public acknowledgement of theft, consequences for the people responsible, vindication for Lucas, would also hurt people like Margaret, who'd worked here for 23 years and deserved better than to lose her job because executives made decisions she had no control over. What happens to the people who actually did steal it? Lucas asked. The research team that took my presentation and repurposed it? Gerald consulted his notes. Most of them no longer work here. The division head who oversaw the initial patent filing retired 2 years ago. Of the 3 engineers who were directly involved, one left for a competitor, one moved to a different department, and one is still in research. I want to talk to that one. The engineer who's still here. Victoria exchanged glances with Gerald. Why? Because I want to understand how it happened. How someone could take another person's work and claim it as their own. I need to hear it from someone who was actually there. There was a long silence. Then Victoria nodded. His name is Robert Chen. No relation to me, despite the last name. He's been with Meridian for 15 years. I'll arrange a meeting. And the non-disclosure clause? Non-negotiable, Gerald said firmly. Without it, we can't protect the company from the patent attorney who's already sniffing around this case. His client will use any public statement you make as ammunition for their challenge. We settle this quietly, or we fight it publicly, and everyone loses. Lucas thought about David Chang, about the reporters who'd called him yesterday, about the story they'd tell if he gave them the chance. A story about corporate theft and invisible janitors and justice delayed. It would be compelling. It would probably be true. And it would destroy everything Victoria was trying to build from this wreckage. I'll sign, Lucas said quietly. But I want one addition. A scholarship fund for children of Meridian employees. Fully funded, administered independently, focused on kids pursuing STEM education. I want Evan's name on it. Victoria smiled. The Evan Reed Scholarship Fund. I like it. Gerald added to the agreement. 1 million initial funding, $500,000 annually thereafter. That's generous, Lucas said. That's appropriate. Your son is the reason you sacrificed your career. The least we can do is make sure other parents don't have to make the same choice. They spent the next 2 hours working through details. Sarah Kim outlined the communication strategy. A press release announcing Lucas's appointment as chief engineer, carefully worded to acknowledge his foundational contributions to Meridian's proprietary technology without admitting theft. Gerald walked through equity transfer timelines, tax implications, vesting schedules. Victoria described the current state of the propulsion division and where she saw opportunities for innovation. By noon, Lucas's head was swimming with information and his hand was cramping from signing documents. When they finally finished, Victoria stood and extended her hand. Welcome to Meridian Technologies, Chief Engineer Reed. I look forward to working with you. Lucas shook her hand, and this time it felt different than it had that morning. Not quite friendship. They had too much complicated history for that. But something like mutual respect, acknowledgement that they were both trying to navigate an impossible situation with some measure of integrity intact. There's one more thing, Victoria said. Robert Chen is waiting in conference room B. I thought you might want to have that conversation now, while everything is still fresh. Lucas nodded. Thank you. Sarah and Gerald left, and Victoria walked Lucas to the conference room. She paused outside the door with her hand on the handle. I don't know what you're hoping to get from this conversation, she said quietly. But Lucas? Robert's a good engineer. Whatever happened 13 years ago, he's spent the time since then doing solid work. Try to remember that people make mistakes. Sometimes they don't even realize they're making them until it's too late to fix without causing more damage. Then she opened his door and left Lucas alone with the man who'd stolen his future. Robert Chen sat at the conference table with his hands folded in front of him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was younger than Lucas expected, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing you were about to have an uncomfortable conversation. When Lucas entered, Robert stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. "Mr. Reed, I'm Robert Chen. I understand you wanted to speak with me." Lucas sat down across from him. "I want to understand how it happened. I presented a hybrid propulsion design to Meridian in 2012. You were part of the team that developed it into the patent that's made this company billions. I need to know how my work became yours." Robert's face flushed. "It wasn't like that. I mean, it was, but not the way you're thinking. Can I explain?" "That's why I'm here." Robert took a deep breath. "I was a junior engineer back then, just a few years out of grad school. Your presentation came through our division head, Marcus Reeves. He showed it to the team and said it was interesting but too risky for us to pursue directly, but he also said we should keep the concepts in mind for future projects. So you knew it was my design." "We knew it came from an external consultant named Lucas Reed, yes, but Marcus told us that you'd been paid for the consultation, that it was work for hire, that once you'd presented it to us, it became Meridian's property to develop however we saw fit." Lucas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I was never paid, and there was no work for hire agreement." Robert's face went pale. "What?" "I presented that design as part of a pitch to become a full-time consultant for Meridian. You rejected it, told me it was too different from your current direction. I never received $1, never signed anything that would transfer ownership. Oh God." Robert put his head in his hands. "Marcus told us it was all handled legally. He said you'd signed off on everything and we were free to use the concepts. We trusted him. We were junior engineers. We didn't question the division head when he said something was cleared through legal. Did you ever try to contact me? To ask questions or get clarification on the design?" "Marcus said you'd made it clear you didn't want ongoing involvement. He said you were leaving the field entirely for personal reasons and preferred not to be contacted." Lucas sat back in his chair. The picture was becoming clear now. A division head who'd seen an opportunity, a group of junior engineers who'd trusted their superior, and a theft that had been framed as legitimate development. Robert probably had no idea he was building his career on stolen work. "What happened to Marcus Reeves?" Lucas asked. "He retired 2 years ago. Moved to Florida with a very generous pension, from what I heard." Robert looked up at Lucas with miserable eyes. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, but I'm genuinely sorry. If any of us had known the truth, we never would have—" "I believe you," Lucas said quietly. And he did. Robert didn't look like a thief. He looked like someone who'd been lied to and was only now realizing the extent of the deception. "Are you going to press charges?" Robert asked. "Because I understand if you do. I'd probably do the same thing in your position." Lucas thought about it. Thought about lawyers and courtrooms and the satisfaction of seeing Marcus Reeves face consequences for what he'd done. But Marcus was in Florida, retired, beyond the reach of anything meaningful. And Robert was sitting across from him looking like his world was falling apart, realizing that a foundational achievement of his career was built on someone else's stolen work. "No," Lucas said, "I'm not pressing charges. You were a junior engineer following orders from someone you trusted. That's not criminal. That's just being human." Robert's relief was visible. "Thank you. I don't deserve that, but thank you. You can repay me by being honest going forward. I'm going to be chief engineer here, which means we'll be working together. I need to know I can trust you." "You can. I swear it." Robert hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you leave engineering? Marcus said it was personal, but he was obviously lying about everything else. What really happened?" Lucas pulled out his phone and showed Robert the photo of Evan at the science fair, that gap-toothed smile and the pride in his eyes. "I had a son who needed me more than I needed a career, so I chose him." Robert stared at the photo. "You gave up engineering entirely to be a single parent?" "I gave up the career. I never gave up engineering. I just did it in my garage instead of a lab." "The Mustang," Robert said slowly. "Ms. Chen said you built a working prototype. That's why she believed you about the original design. 5 years of refinement. Every night after my son went to bed, I worked on making it better. It's not pretty, but it runs better than anything in your lab. I'd love to see it sometime, if that's not too presumptuous. Lucas studied Robert for a moment. The younger engineer looked genuinely interested, genuinely contrite, genuinely willing to start over on honest footing. Maybe that was enough. Come to the parking lot after work today. I'll show you what 15 years of development looks like when you're not constrained by corporate timelines. Robert's face lit up. Really? Thank you, Mr. Reed. I mean it. Call me Lucas. We're colleagues now. They shook hands, and Lucas left the conference room feeling like at least one piece of this complicated situation had been resolved with something approaching grace. Robert wasn't the villain he'd imagined. Marcus Reeves was. But Marcus was gone, untouchable, living out his retirement while Lucas cleaned up the mess he'd left behind. Lucas spent the rest of the afternoon in meetings with various department heads, being introduced as the new chief engineer, answering questions about his vision for the propulsion division. People who'd walked past him 1,000 times as invisible furniture now hung on his words, took notes on his ideas, treated him like his opinions mattered. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. At 4:30, Lucas's phone buzzed with a text from Evan's school. Mr. Reed, this is Mrs. Patterson. Evan mentioned you might be available to help with his district competition preparation. Would you have time to meet with us tomorrow after school to discuss his project? Lucas smiled and typed back, absolutely. What time works for you? The response was immediate, 3:30 p.m., and Mr. Reed, congratulations on your new position at Meridian. Evan told me the news. He's very proud of his father. Lucas felt his throat tighten. He pocketed his phone and went to find Victoria, who was in her office reviewing quarterly reports. I need to leave by 3 tomorrow, he said from her doorway. My son has science competition prep. Victoria looked up. Of course. Lucas, you don't need to ask permission anymore. You're setting your own schedule now. Family first, remember? I remember. Just wanted to make sure that actually means what you said it means. It does. Go be with your son. The propulsion division will survive without you for an afternoon. Lucas nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Victoria, thank you for all of this. I know it wasn't easy. Neither was what you've been through. We're even. She smiled slightly. Now get out of here. I have actual work to do and you're distracting me. Lucas left through the executive entrance this time, walking past the reception desk where Jennifer called out, Have a good evening, Mr. Reed. He waved back, still not quite used to being seen, to mattering, to existing as something more than background noise in other people's important lives. His Mustang sat in the executive lot where he'd parked it that morning. Robert Chen was already there, examining the exterior with the careful attention of someone who understood that appearances could be deceiving. It really does look terrible, Robert said as Lucas approached. No offense. None taken. It's supposed to look terrible. Keeps people from asking questions. Lucas opened the hood, and Robert's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine awe. Oh my God, this is incredible. You built this yourself? In a garage? With hand tools and YouTube videos and a lot of trial and error. The core design is 13 years old, but I've been refining it constantly. Better efficiency, smoother power delivery, reduced emissions. Everything your lab's been working on, I did first. Robert leaned in closer, tracing the modifications with his eyes. The hybrid coupling here, the way you've integrated the electric and combustion systems, this is genius-level work. And you did this while working as a janitor? Engineering was never about the job title. It's about solving problems because they're interesting, because they matter, because you can't not solve them even when nobody's paying you to. Robert straightened up and looked at Lucas with something like reverence. I've been working in that lab for 12 years, and I've never seen anything as elegant as this. You're going to change everything, aren't you? We're going to change everything, Lucas corrected, if you're willing to work with me honestly. I am, absolutely. Robert paused. Can I ask you something else? Sure. How did you not hate us? All this time working here, cleaning our offices, knowing we'd stolen from you, how did you not just burn the whole place down? Lucas closed the hood and leaned against the car. Because hate takes energy I needed for my son. Because revenge wouldn't have changed the past. And because I've learned that people are complicated. Victoria didn't know. You didn't know. The only person who actually understood what he was doing is retired in Florida, and I'll probably never get the satisfaction of confronting him. That doesn't seem fair. It's not. But fair and reality are two different things. I can either spend my energy being angry about what should have been, or I can use it to build what comes next. I choose building. Robert nodded slowly. I want to help. With whatever you're planning for the propulsion division. I know I don't have any right to ask after everything that happened, but I'd like to be part of making things right. Then show up tomorrow ready to work. We're going to take this prototype and turn it into something that actually goes into production. Something that proves innovation doesn't require stealing from people who can't defend themselves. I'll be there. They shook hands again, and Robert headed to his own car. Lucas got into his Mustang and sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of the day settling over him. Everything had changed in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, he was a janitor. Today, he was chief engineer with equity worth hundreds of millions and the power to actually make the innovations he'd been dreaming about for 13 years. His phone rang. Evan. Hey, kiddo? Dad, everyone's talking about you. Marcus's mom saw something online about a new chief engineer at Meridian Technologies and showed him the picture, and it's you. Are you famous now? Lucas laughed. I don't know about famous, but yes, things have changed. Good changes? Very good changes. I'll explain everything when I get home. Want to pick up pizza on the way? Can we afford it? Evan asked, and Lucas felt his heart break a little at the question. His 12-year-old son had learned to worry about money, to calculate the cost of small luxuries, to understand that sometimes the answer was no because budgets were tight. We can definitely afford pizza, Lucas said gently. And Evan, you don't have to worry about money anymore. I promise. Because of the new job? Because of a lot of things. I'll explain when I'm home. 20 minutes, okay? Okay, love you, Dad. Love you too. Lucas ended the call and started the engine. That perfect hum filled the car, the sound of everything he'd built alone in his garage while the world slept, and his son dreamed of futures that didn't require sacrifice. He pulled out of the executive lot and drove toward home, toward Evan, toward a conversation that would change how his son understood the past 3 years and everything that had led to this moment. The pizza place was busy, but Lucas didn't mind waiting. He stood in line thinking about tomorrow, about starting work in the propulsion lab as an engineer instead of the janitor who cleaned it. About showing Evan that sometimes justice took time, but eventually arrived. About building a future where his son never had to choose between his dreams and his family the way Lucas had. When he finally got home with pizza and breadsticks, Evan was waiting at the door, practically vibrating with excitement and questions. They sat at their small kitchen table, the same one where they'd eaten hundreds of dinners together, and Lucas told his son everything. About the original design, about the theft, about Victoria's offer and the settlement, and what it meant for their future. Evan listened with wide eyes, interrupting occasionally with questions, his pizza forgotten on his plate as he absorbed the enormity of what his father was telling him. So we're rich now, Evan asked when Lucas finished. We're secure now. There's a difference. Rich means having more money than you need. Secure means never having to worry about losing what matters. And you're okay with not getting revenge on the guy who stole from you? Lucas thought about that. I'm okay with getting justice instead. Revenge would have been destroying Victoria's company and putting 3,000 people out of work. Justice is me getting credit, getting compensated, and getting the chance to keep building things that matter. That's enough. Evan nodded slowly. I think that's really cool, Dad, that you chose the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong thing. Where'd you learn that phrase? You've been saying it my whole life. I just finally get what it means. Lucas pulled his son into a hug, this brilliant, thoughtful 12-year-old who'd grown up watching his father choose integrity over comfort, family over ambition, love over bitterness. If Lucas had done nothing else right in his life, he'd at least raised a son who understood that character mattered more than revenge. So what happens now? Evan asked. With your new job and everything? Now I get to be an engineer again. I get to work on problems that actually interest me. I get to make sure your college is paid for and that we never have to worry about money again. And most importantly, I get to come home every night and have dinner with you. That's the most important part? That's the only part that actually matters, kiddo. Everything else is just details. They finished their pizza and spent the evening talking about Evan's district competition preparation, about the modifications he wanted to make to his project, about whether Lucas could help him build a better demonstration model. And for the first time in 3 years, Lucas talked about engineering with his son without that hollow feeling of mourning something he'd lost. Because he hadn't lost it. He'd just set it aside for a while, and now he was picking it back up, and it fit in his hands like it had never left. That night, after Evan went to bed, Lucas sat at their kitchen table with his notebooks spread out in front of him. Not to hide them anymore, but to begin the work of translating garage innovations into production reality. Tomorrow, he'd start at Meridian as chief engineer. Tomorrow, he'd begin building the future he'd designed 13 years ago. But tonight, he was just a father who'd kept his promise to his son, who'd chosen love over ambition and somehow ended up with both. Lucas closed his notebooks and went to bed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he slept without the weight of stolen dreams pressing down on his chest. Because sometimes justice didn't roar. Sometimes it just quietly knocked on your door and asked if you were ready to finally come home. Lucas woke up on his first official day as chief engineer with the strange sensation that he'd somehow stepped into someone else's life. The alarm went off at the same time it always had, but instead of reaching for his janitor's uniform hanging on the back of the door, he pulled out the new suit he'd bought the day before. Charcoal gray, professional, the kind of thing that announced you belonged in boardrooms and engineering labs rather than supply closets. Evan was already awake when Lucas came into the kitchen, dressed for school and eating cereal while flipping through his science textbook. The boy looked up and actually did a double take. "Whoa, you look like a real engineer." Lucas smiled as he started the coffee maker. "I've always been a real engineer, kiddo. I just look like one now, too." "You know what I mean. You look important." The work was always important, even when I was doing it in our garage at midnight. The clothes don't change that. Lucas poured himself coffee and sat down across from his son. "Speaking of which, I talked to your teacher yesterday. Mrs. Patterson wants to meet this afternoon to discuss your district competition prep." Evan's face lit up. "Really? You're coming?" "Wouldn't miss it. I'm done at Meridian by 3 and family comes first. That's the deal I made." "With Ms. Chen?" "With myself. The job is important, but you're more important. Always have been, always will be." Evan went back to his cereal, but Lucas could see the smile playing at the corners of his mouth. 3 years of coming home exhausted from cleaning floors, of carefully budgeting every dollar, of making sacrifices that his son had been old enough to notice even if he didn't fully understand them, all of it had been leading to this. Not the money or the title, but the simple fact that Lucas could finally be present for his son without the crushing weight of financial anxiety making every moment feel borrowed. They finished breakfast together, and Lucas drove Evan to school before heading to Meridian. The parking lot looked different in morning light when you weren't trying to be invisible. Lucas parked in the executive section, still felt strange, like he was breaking some unspoken rule, and walked through the main entrance instead of slinking around to the employee door and back. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. Miss Chen asked me to let her know when you arrived. I'll call her office." "Thank you," Lucas said, and even that felt foreign. Being thanked by receptionists instead of being invisible to them. Victoria appeared a few minutes later, dressed in a navy suit and carrying a tablet. "Lucas, good, you're here. I want to show you the lab before the rest of the team arrives. Give you a chance to orient yourself without 20 engineers asking questions." They took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the Research and Development Division occupied the entire level. Victoria swiped her badge. No, their badges now, Lucas realized, seeing the security reader recognize him as an authorized executive, and led him through doors he'd only ever seen from the outside while mopping hallways. The propulsion lab was bigger than Lucas expected, taking up at least a quarter of the floor. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in components and testing equipment. In the center of the room sat 3 prototype engines in various stages of assembly, connected to monitoring systems that tracked performance metrics in real time. "This is what we've been working on for the past 18 months, Victoria said, gesturing to the nearest prototype. "Refinements to the original design, trying to improve efficiency and reduce production costs. We're at about 73% of the theoretical maximum efficiency." Lucas walked over to the prototype and studied it. He could see his original design in the architecture, but also years of modifications by engineers who'd been working without understanding the core principles. Some improvements were solid, others were actually degrading performance. "You're using the wrong coupling ratio here," Lucas said, pointing to a junction where electric and combustion systems interfaced. "And this heat exchange system is fighting against itself. That's why you're stuck at 73%. Victoria pulled out her tablet and made notes. "Can you fix it?" "I can optimize it. Get you to 85, maybe 90% with the right modifications. But the real breakthrough isn't in refining this design. It's in what comes next." "What comes next?" Lucas pulled out his phone and showed her photos of his Mustang's engine, specifically the modifications he'd made over the past 2 years. "I've been working on a second-generation system that eliminates the coupling problem entirely. Different architecture, cleaner integration, better scalability for production. That's what we should be building." Victoria studied the photos, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine excitement. "This is extraordinary. How far along is it?" "Fully functional prototype. I've been running it daily for 6 months with zero degradation. It's ready for production engineering." "Then that's what we build. I'll clear whatever budget and resources you need." She paused. "Lucas, I know this is your first day and I don't want to overwhelm you, but I need to know, can we have a production-ready design in 6 months? We have investors expecting next-generation technology by end of fiscal year." Lucas thought about it. 6 months was aggressive, but not impossible if he had the right team and actual resources instead of hand tools and YouTube videos. "Yes, but I'll need Robert Chen on my team full-time, plus 2 more senior engineers and at least 3 technicians who understand precision manufacturing." "Done. I'll have HR process the transfers today." Victoria's phone buzzed and she checked it, then sighed. "I have to go. Board meeting in 20 minutes. Your office is down the hall, 3rd door on the left. Robert will be here at 8 to help you get oriented. And Lucas? Welcome home." She left, and Lucas stood alone in the lab that should have been his 13 years ago. He walked between the workbenches, running his hands over equipment that represented millions of dollars in investment, thinking about all the nights he'd spent in his garage with salvaged parts and borrowed tools, creating miracles from nothing because creation was who he was, even when the world had decided he was just a janitor. Robert arrived at 8 exactly, followed by 2 other engineers Victoria had pulled from different divisions. They spent the morning reviewing the current prototype designs, and Lucas walked them through the modifications needed to break through the efficiency ceiling. The engineers listened with the kind of focused attention that told Lucas they understood they were seeing something special, that the man leading them wasn't just management with a fancy title, but someone who actually understood the work at a level they were still aspiring to reach. At noon, Lucas took a break and called Margaret. The custodial supervisor answered on the second ring. "Lucas, I heard about your new position. Congratulations." "Thank you, Margaret. Listen, I wanted to make sure you knew about the raise. 20% for all custodial staff, effective immediately." There was a long silence. Then, "You did that? You actually negotiated for us?" "You saved Victoria's investor presentation. You deserved recognition, not invisibility. The raise is permanent, and I made sure it's in writing." Margaret's voice went thick. "I've worked here 23 years, Lucas. Nobody's ever fought for us before." "Thank you. Thank me by taking care of yourself. You worked too hard." Says the man who spent all night cleaning up a water leak and then negotiated a multi-million-dollar deal the next morning. She laughed. "You're something else, Lucas Reed." They talked for a few more minutes, and when Lucas hung up, he felt lighter somehow. The money and the title were fine, but this, knowing that he'd used his unexpected leverage to help people who'd been invisible alongside him, this felt like it actually mattered. The afternoon flew by in a blur of technical discussions and design reviews. At 2:45, Lucas wrapped up a meeting about materials testing and headed for the door. "We're not done here," one of the engineers protested. "We still need to finalize the thermal management specs." "I have to leave," Lucas said simply. "My son has a meeting at his school. We'll pick this up tomorrow morning." The engineer looked startled, like he'd never heard someone prioritize family over work in the middle of a critical project. But Robert just nodded. Go! We'll document what we covered today and prep the thermal analysis for tomorrow. Lucas drove to Evan's school and found his son waiting outside the science lab with Mrs. Patterson. The teacher was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of patient enthusiasm that made kids actually want to learn. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. Evan's been telling me about the modifications he wants to make to his project for the district competition. I think with your expertise, we could really elevate his presentation. They spent the next hour in the lab, Lucas helping Evan refine his hybrid propulsion model, while Mrs. Patterson took notes on the improvements. Lucas showed his son how to optimize the energy flow, how to make the demonstration more visually compelling, how to explain complex concepts in ways that judges without engineering backgrounds could understand. Watching Evan work, the careful attention to detail, the questions that showed genuine understanding rather than rote memorization, the excitement when a modification worked exactly as predicted, Lucas felt a surge of pride so intense it was almost painful. Your father's an excellent teacher, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, while Evan was across the lab testing a component. Evan's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one, Lucas said. He's the reason I kept going when everything else fell apart. They finished up around 4:30, and Lucas drove Evan home with the improved model carefully secured in the back seat. His son chattered the whole way about the competition, about the other schools they'd be facing, about whether the judges would understand what made his design innovative. Even if they don't, Lucas said, pulling into their apartment parking lot, you'll know. You built something extraordinary, Evan. That matters more than any trophy. But winning would still be cool. Lucas laughed. Yeah, winning would still be cool. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and right. Lucas would wake up early, make breakfast with Evan, drop him at school, then spend his days in the lab doing the work he'd been born to do. The engineering challenges were complex and engaging. The team he'd assembled was talented and eager to learn, and slowly but steadily, they made progress on the next generation propulsion system that would revolutionize the industry. Evenings were for Evan. Homework help, district competition prep, dinner together at their small kitchen table, conversations about everything and nothing. Lucas had worried that the new job would consume him the way his old engineering career had, but he'd made a promise to himself and to his son, and he kept it. Family first. Always. 3 weeks into his new position, Victoria called Lucas into her office. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who'd been fighting hard battles and winning most of them. The patent attorney representing the competitor filed formal withdrawal of their challenge yesterday, she said without preamble. Once we demonstrated that we'd already corrected the attribution error and compensated you appropriately, they lost their leverage. The patent stands, you get full credit, and we avoided a very ugly court battle. Lucas sat down. That's good news. It's excellent news. It also means we can move forward with the public announcement of your appointment without legal clouds hanging over it. I've scheduled a press conference for next week. You'll be there alongside me, presenting the next generation design to investors and media. Victoria, I'm not good at press conferences. I'm an engineer, not a spokesperson. You're the face of innovation at Meridian now. People need to see you to understand that we're built on genuine brilliance rather than corporate theft. Besides, you'll be fine. Just talk about the work. Let your passion show through. That's all anyone really wants to see. The press conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Meridian's largest conference room. Lucas wore his best suit and tried not to think about the cameras and reporters that would be recording every word. Evan had wanted to come, but Lucas insisted he stay in school. This was business, not a family event, and besides, his son had a math test that afternoon he'd been studying for all week. Victoria opened the presentation with a corporate overview, then introduced Lucas as chief engineer and the original designer of Meridian's proprietary propulsion technology. When Lucas stepped up to the podium, he saw at least 40 faces staring back at him. Reporters, investors, industry analysts, all of them waiting to see if he was the real deal or just an interesting story. He talked about the engineering principles behind the hybrid system, about the next generation improvements they were developing, about his vision for sustainable transportation that didn't require sacrificing performance or affordability. He forgot about the cameras and just spoke to the work. And when he finished, the questions from reporters were actually intelligent, engaged. clearly from people who understood they were witnessing something significant. One reporter near the back raised her hand. "Mr. Reed, there are rumors that your original design was initially rejected by Meridian, and you spent years working as a custodian here. Can you comment on that?" Lucas glanced at Victoria, who gave him a small nod. They'd prepared for this question. "It's true that my path to this position was unconventional," Lucas said carefully. "There was a miscommunication years ago about attribution that resulted in my contribution not being properly recognized. But the important thing is that when the error came to light, Meridian immediately corrected it. I'm here now because this company values innovation and integrity. That's what matters." The reporter pressed, "But you worked as a janitor while your design made billions for this company. Don't you feel angry about that?" Lucas thought about how to answer, about all the things he could say, the bitterness, the injustice, the years of watching others profit from his work. But then he thought about Evan, about the choice he'd made to be a father first, about whether anger would have changed anything except making him more miserable. "I feel grateful," Lucas said finally, "grateful that I had the time to be the father my son needed, grateful that eventually justice prevailed, grateful that I get to spend my days now doing work that matters. Anger wouldn't have built a better engine. It wouldn't have raised my son. It wouldn't have created anything except more pain. So no, I'm not angry. I'm focused on what comes next." The press conference ended shortly after, and as reporters filed out, several stopped to shake Lucas's hand and thank him for his honesty. Victoria pulled him aside once the room cleared. "That was perfect. Exactly the right tone. You just made Meridian look like a company that admits mistakes and corrects them, which is worth more than any marketing campaign could buy." She paused. "And Lucas, I think you actually believe what you said about not being angry." "I do. Anger's exhausting. Building things is better. You're a better person than I am. If someone had stolen 13 years from me, I'd want blood." Lucas smiled. "You're getting there. You did the right thing when it mattered. That counts." The district science competition arrived 2 weeks later on a Saturday afternoon. Lucas took the day off, he had that luxury now, and drove Evan to the convention center where schools from across the region had set up their projects. The competition was significantly larger than the school fair, with at least 100 projects and judges who were actual engineers and scientists rather than well-meaning teachers. Evan set up his hybrid propulsion model with hands that shook slightly from nerves. Lucas helped him arrange the display, then stepped back to let his son handle the presentation on his own. Part of being a parent was knowing when to help and when to get out of the way. The judging took 3 hours. Lucas watched from a distance as Evan explained his project to one group after another, fielding questions with confidence that had been built through practice and preparation. Other parents hovered nervously near their children's displays. But Lucas had learned years ago that Evan performed better when he wasn't being watched too closely. When the judges finally finished and retreated to deliberate, Evan came over to where Lucas was sitting. "How'd I do?" the boy asked. "You were brilliant, confident, clear. You knew your material inside and out. I'm proud of you." "But did I win?" "We'll find out in about 20 minutes. Until then, how about we get some food from the concession stand? You haven't eaten since breakfast." They were halfway through mediocre hot dogs when the announcement came over the PA system asking all participants to return to the main floor for the awards ceremony. Evan grabbed Lucas's hand, something he hadn't done in public for at least a year, usually too aware of being 12 and therefore too old for that kind of thing, and they walked back together. The third-place winner was announced, a girl from a school across town with a solar desalination project. Then second place went to a boy who'd designed an improved prosthetic hand. When they called Evan's name for first place, Lucas felt his son's hand tighten in his own, felt the shock and joy coursing through that small body. Evan walked up to accept his trophy and the scholarship certificate, and when the judges asked if he wanted to say anything, he looked directly at Lucas. "I want to thank my dad," Evan said, his voice carrying across the convention center. "He taught me that great ideas don't need permission, just persistence, and that the best innovations come from people who keep working even when nobody's watching. Everything I know about engineering, I learned from him." Lucas felt his throat close up. He managed to keep it together until they got back to the car, and then he just sat there in the driver's seat with his hands on the wheel, overwhelmed by the simple fact that he'd raised a son who was brilliant and kind and understood that persistence mattered more than permission. "Dad, you okay?" Evan asked. "I'm perfect, kiddo. Just really, really proud of you." They drove home with the first place trophy sitting between them, and Lucas thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. The money, the position, the recognition, all of it mattered in practical ways that would shape their future. But this moment, with his son glowing from achievement and thanking his father in front of strangers, this was what actually counted. 6 months after Lucas's first day as chief engineer, Meridian Technologies unveiled the next-generation hybrid propulsion system at an industry conference in San Francisco. Lucas stood on stage beside Victoria, presenting technical details to an audience of engineers and investors who understood exactly how revolutionary the design was. Orders started coming in before the presentation even ended. Automotive manufacturers, aerospace companies, even marine engineering firms interested in adapting the technology for ships. The financial impact was immediate and massive. Meridian's stock price jumped 37% in a single day. Lucas's 15% equity became worth over $500 million. Victoria called him into her office the day after the announcement with champagne, and an expression that was equal parts exhausted and triumphant. "We did it," she said, pouring 2 glasses. "Next generation technology, production ready, already generating more orders than we can fill for the next 2 years. Lucas, you saved this company." "We saved this company," Lucas corrected. "You could have fought me, could have buried the truth and kept pretending the original design was yours. You chose integrity instead. That matters." They toasted, and Victoria set down her glass. "I've been thinking about succession planning. I'm 52 and I'd like to retire before I'm 60. When I do, I want you to take over as CEO." Lucas nearly choked on his champagne. "Victoria, I'm an engineer, not a business executive. You're a leader who people trust because you've earned it. You understand the technology, you treat people with dignity, and you make decisions based on what's right rather than what's profitable. That's exactly what Meridian needs." She smiled. "You don't have to answer now, but think about it. When I'm ready to step down, I want to know the company is in hands I trust." Lucas did think about it over the following weeks and months. He thought about it while working in the lab with Robert and the rest of his team. He thought about it during dinners with Evan, who was now preparing for high school with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. He thought about it while driving his Mustang, still ugly, still rusty, still running better than any car in any executive parking lot in the world. 1 year after Lucas's first day as chief engineer, Meridian Technologies donated the original Mustang prototype to the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. They'd asked Lucas if he wanted to keep it, but he'd decided the car belonged in a place where future engineers could see it and understand that innovation didn't require perfect circumstances or unlimited resources or institutional support. Sometimes it just required one person who refused to stop creating, even when the world had decided they didn't matter. The donation ceremony was small but meaningful. Lucas stood next to the Mustang while a curator explained its significance. The car that held a prototype worth billions, built by a single father in a garage with hand tools and persistence. Evan stood beside his father, 16 now, and already taller than Lucas, already thinking about college applications and engineering programs and the future he'd build with the education his father's work had secured. "It's weird seeing our car in a museum," Evan said quietly while the curator talked to reporters. "Like it belongs to history now instead of us." "It never really belonged to us," Lucas replied. "We were just taking care of it for a while. Now it gets to inspire other people the way my father's work inspired me." "Do you miss it, the car?" "I miss what it represented. The late nights in this garage, the freedom to build without committees or budgets or corporate oversight. But I don't miss the circumstances that made those nights necessary." Lucas put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I'd rather have boring evenings at home with you than brilliant midnight sessions alone in a garage." Even if the midnight sessions produced revolutionary technology? Even then. Revolutionary technology is great, Evan, but you're the only thing I've ever created that actually matters. The ceremony ended, and they walked through the museum together, past exhibits showing the evolution of American innovation. Lucas stopped in front of a display about the Wright brothers, about two bicycle mechanics who'd built the first airplane in their workshop because everyone else said it was impossible. "You know what the real innovation is?" Lucas said to Evan. "Not the technology, not the engineering. It's the refusal to accept that circumstances define what you're capable of creating. The Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics. I was a janitor. What mattered was that we kept building anyway. So I should keep building too, even when things get hard?" "Especially when things get hard. That's when building matters most." They left the museum and drove back to their apartment. Not the same cramped place they'd lived in for years, but a larger home in a better neighborhood that Lucas had bought once the equity started converting to actual money. Evan went to his room to work on college applications while Lucas sat in his home office, looking at the engineering awards that now lined his shelves, the recognition from professional societies, the honorary doctorate from his old university. His phone rang. Victoria. "Just got word that the second-generation system passed all regulatory testing. We're cleared for full production across all markets. Lucas, we're about to change the entire automotive industry." "That's great news. Have you told the board?" "I'm about to. But I wanted you to hear it first, because none of this happens without you, without your refusal to stop innovating even when you had every reason to give up." "I had one very good reason not to give up. He's in the next room working on his college essays." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You're a good father, Lucas, and a good engineer. And someday, you're going to be a good CEO. Think about what I said." She hung up, and Lucas sat in his office thinking about the path that had brought him here. From engineer to janitor to chief engineer to potential CEO. From invisible to unavoidable. From stolen work to recognized genius. The journey had been painful and slow and unfair, but it had also been worth it in ways he was still learning to understand. 2 years after Lucas joined Meridian as chief engineer, Evan graduated high school as valedictorian with a full scholarship to MIT's engineering program. Lucas sat in the audience watching his son give the commencement speech, talking about persistence and innovation and learning from a father who'd taught him that greatness wasn't about titles or recognition, but about showing up and doing the work even when nobody was watching. After the ceremony, they took photos together in front of the school, and a local reporter who'd been covering the event asked if she could interview them. "I understand you're Lucas Reed," she said, "the chief engineer at Meridian Technologies, and your son is heading to MIT on scholarship. That must be incredibly gratifying." Lucas looked at Evan, at this young man who'd grown up watching his father push a mop, and somehow still believed he could change the world. "The scholarship is wonderful. The MIT acceptance is wonderful. But honestly, the most gratifying thing is knowing I raised someone who understands that character matters more than circumstances. That's worth more than any engineering achievement." The reporter turned to Evan. "What did you learn from your father?" Evan didn't hesitate. "That love is the most important innovation. Everything else is just details." 3 years after Lucas became chief engineer, Victoria announced her retirement. She was 55 years old and ready to step back from the demands of running a major corporation. The board of directors met to discuss succession, and when they offered Lucas the CEO position, he said yes. He said yes because he'd learned that leadership wasn't about titles or corner offices, but about treating people with dignity and making decisions based on what was right rather than what was easy. He said yes because he wanted to build a company where custodial staff got raises without having to steal the CEO's attention first. He said yes because Evan was at MIT now, thriving, no longer needing his father home every evening, and Lucas had energy to invest in building something larger than just engines. On his first day as CEO, Lucas made his first executive decision. He promoted Margaret to Director of Facilities Operations with a salary that reflected the value she'd been providing for 23 years without recognition. His second decision was to implement a company-wide profit-sharing program that ensured every employee, regardless of position, benefited when Meridian succeeded. His third decision was to park his new company car, a sensible hybrid sedan that used the propulsion system he had designed, in the back lot instead of the executive section, because he never wanted to forget what it felt like to be invisible. 5 years after Lucas became CEO, Meridian Technologies was the leading manufacturer of hybrid propulsion systems in North America. The company employed 8,000 people, generated billions in annual revenue, and was regularly cited as one of the best places to work in the technology sector. Lucas ran the company from an office that looked out over the parking lot where his Mustang had once sat, mocked and dismissed and holding a fortune that nobody could see. He thought about that sometimes, about how often the most valuable things were the ones that looked worthless to people who didn't bother to look closely. Evan graduated from MIT with honors and joined Meridian's research division, not because of nepotism, but because he'd genuinely become one of the brightest young engineers in his field. Father and son worked together on the third-generation propulsion system, the one that would power vehicles for the next decade, and Lucas found himself teaching Evan the same lessons his own father had taught him in that garage so many years ago. On the 10-year anniversary of Lucas's first day as chief engineer, 8 years into his tenure as CEO, Meridian held a company celebration. Lucas stood on stage in the same conference room where Victoria had once presented his stolen work as her own, and he looked out at thousands of employees who'd built their careers on honest innovation rather than theft. 10 years ago, Lucas said, I was mopping floors in this building. I was invisible to most of you, just part of the infrastructure, like the plumbing or the electrical system. And I want to tell you why that experience made me a better leader than any business school ever could have. He talked about dignity, about how every person in the building, regardless of their title, contributed something valuable and deserved to be seen. He talked about persistence, about continuing to create even when nobody was watching or caring or recognizing your work. He talked about love, about choosing his son over his ambition and somehow ending up with both. The real innovation, Lucas concluded, isn't under the hood of our engines. It's in how we treat each other. It's in remembering that the janitor cleaning your office might be a genius who just needs someone to see them. It's in building a company where people matter more than profits, even though treating people well is actually what makes us profitable. That's what I learned mopping these floors. That's what I want Meridian to be. The applause was genuine and loud, and when Lucas stepped down from the stage, Robert Chen was waiting with a smile. You did it, Robert said. Built exactly the company you wanted. We did it, Lucas corrected. Every engineer who refused to take shortcuts, every manager who treated their team with respect, every custodian who kept this place running, we all did it together. That evening, Lucas drove to the Smithsonian where his Mustang still sat in the American History Museum. He stood in front of it for a long time, this ugly car that had held everything that mattered, and he thought about the journey from there to here. A young woman approached, maybe 20 years old, wearing an engineering school hoodie. She stood beside Lucas, staring at the Mustang. This is my favorite exhibit, she said quietly. I come here whenever I need inspiration, whenever I feel like giving up. What inspires you about it? Lucas asked. That someone built this in a garage, that they didn't need permission or resources or anyone's approval. They just kept working because the work mattered to them. She turned to Lucas. I'm first-generation college. My family thinks engineering is impractical, that I should study something that guarantees a job. But seeing this car, knowing someone built revolutionary technology while working as a janitor, it makes me think I can do it too. Lucas felt his throat tighten. You can. The circumstances don't define what you're capable of creating. Your persistence does. Did you know him, the engineer who built this? Lucas smiled. Yeah, I knew him. And he'd want you to know that every time you feel like quitting, that's exactly when you should keep going. Because the breakthrough is usually right on the other side of the moment you want to give up. The young woman nodded, taking a photo of the Mustang with her phone. Then she thanked Lucas and walked away, and he stood there thinking about how his story, his ugly car, his stolen work, his years of invisibility, was inspiring someone he'd never met to keep building even when everything seemed impossible. That night, Lucas called Evan, who was in California for a conference. How's it going? Lucas asked. Good. Presented our research today. I think we're close to solving the scaling problem on the fourth-generation system. Evan paused. Dad? Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it? Giving up engineering the first time? All those years you could have been working on this stuff instead of mopping floors? Lucas thought about how to answer. About the complicated truth that regret and gratitude could exist simultaneously, that you could wish things had been different while still being grateful for how they turned out. I regret that the choice was necessary. Lucas said slowly. I regret that the world makes parents, especially single parents, choose between their children and their careers. I regret that innovation often requires privilege that not everyone has access to. But do I regret choosing you? Never. Not for a single second. Even knowing what you know now, that it all worked out eventually? Especially knowing that, because eventually wasn't guaranteed, Evan. I made those choices not knowing if justice would ever arrive, not knowing if I'd ever be recognized for my work. I made them because you needed me, and that was enough. The fact that things turned out well is wonderful, but it's not why I did it. I did it because you were worth more than any career. Evan was quiet for a moment, then, I hope I can be that kind of parent someday, the kind who loves someone more than they love their own ambition. You will be. You already understand what matters most. Everything else is just details. They talked for a while longer about research and conferences and the small details of daily life. And when Lucas hung up, he felt the same contentment he'd felt 1,000 times before. The contentment of knowing he'd made the right choices, even when they were hard, even when they cost him everything. 15 years after Lucas first walked into Meridian Technologies as a janitor, he retired as CEO at 62 years old. He'd transformed the company into a model of ethical innovation, created technology that powered millions of vehicles worldwide, and proved that genius didn't require permission or resources or institutional support, just persistence and the refusal to stop creating even when nobody was watching. Evan took over as chief engineer, continuing the work his father had started. Lucas stayed on the board but stepped back from daily operations, finally giving himself permission to just build things in his garage again without deadlines or investor expectations or corporate responsibilities. He bought another Mustang, a 67 just like his father's, and spent his retirement doing what he'd always done best, solving problems because they were interesting, creating innovations because creation was who he was, teaching young engineers that circumstances didn't define capability. On the 20th anniversary of the day Lucas first revealed his engine to Victoria Chen in that parking lot, Meridian held a ceremony dedicating the Lucas Reed Engineering Building. It was a new facility focused on research and development, designed to give engineers the resources and freedom to pursue innovations without corporate constraints. Lucas stood at the dedication with Evan beside him, his son now 42 years old with children of his own, brilliant and kind, and everything Lucas had hoped he'd become. The building rose behind them, all glass and steel and promise, a monument to the idea that great work could come from anywhere, from anyone, regardless of their title or their circumstances. You did good, Dad, Evan said quietly while officials gave speeches. Changed a whole industry, changed how companies treat people. That's a hell of a legacy. Lucas looked at his son, at the grandchildren playing nearby, at the building that bore his name and would outlast him by generations. The building's nice. The technology's nice. But you're the legacy that matters, Evan. You and your kids. The rest is just details. Still, most people don't get buildings named after them. Most people don't spend 3 years mopping floors while sitting on a billion-dollar idea either. Life's strange that way. They stood together watching the ceremony, and Lucas thought about the journey that had brought him here. From engineer to janitor to innovator to CEO to retired grandfather who still couldn't stop building things in his garage. It had been painful and beautiful and unfair and worth it, all at the same time. That evening, Lucas drove home in his new Mustang, still ugly because some traditions mattered, and sat in his garage looking at the workbench where he'd spent countless midnight hours creating miracles while his son slept. The garage was cleaner now, more organized, filled with better tools and actual resources. But the work was the same, the drive to build, to innovate, to create something that mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from the young woman he'd met at the Smithsonian years ago. She'd tracked him down somehow, wanted to let him know she'd just accepted a position at a major automotive company as a lead engineer. Wanted to thank him for the encouragement. Lucas smiled and typed back, "Congratulations. Keep building." The world needs engineers who create because they can't not create, regardless of circumstances. The response came quickly. "That's what you taught me. That persistence matters more than permission." Lucas set down his phone and looked around his garage. At the half-finished projects, the sketches pinned to walls, the evidence of a life spent creating. He thought about everything he'd built, the engines, the company, the legacy. But mostly, he thought about Evan, about choosing love over ambition and somehow ending up with both. Because in the end, that was the real innovation, not the hybrid propulsion system, or the billions in revenue, or the buildings with his name on them. The real innovation was learning that love was more powerful than genius, that character mattered more than recognition, that showing up for the people who needed you was worth more than any technology you could ever design. Lucas turned off the garage light and went inside, where dinner was waiting and life was good, and the future he'd built through persistence and love stretched out ahead of him, full of promise and possibility, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd done exactly what mattered most. He'd been a father first. Everything else had just been details. And somehow, miraculously, that had been enough.